Atlanta's Centennial Park glowed beneath the setting sun, golden light kissing the tops of trees and glinting off marble monuments. In the center of it all stood Marcus Johnson, a calm, commanding black man in a charcoal blazer, his voice rising like a hymn over the gathering crowd. For 20 years, he's been Atlanta's backbone, a voice for the voiceless, a man who's pulled young lives back from the edge with nothing but truth, grit, and an unshakable belief in justice. But that evening, as the wind rustled the banners behind him and his words echoed across the square, something else stirred. A white van rolled up near the fountain. Doors slammed. Boots hit concrete. ICE agents, led by one man, Michael Stone, pushed through the crowd like they owned the place. Stone's voice cracked through the park. "Papers, now!" Marcus didn't flinch. "I'm an American citizen," he said, steady as a church bell. But Stone didn't care. To him, Marcus was just another black man with too much confidence. He didn't know who Marcus really was. He didn't know this man had built schools, stopped violence, and buried friends the system forgot. He didn't know Marcus had been honored by mayors, governors, and even kids who used to sleep with guns under their pillows. So when Stone barked orders, when cuffs dug into Marcus's wrists and blood trickled down his face, what he didn't realize was that the whole world was watching. What happens when a symbol of peace becomes the target of a system designed to silence him? Can one man's dignity ignite a movement? If this moves you, share it, right now, and tell us, where are you watching from? Comment, shout justice below, because this is just the beginning. The sun dipped low over Atlanta's Centennial Olympic Park, casting fire-orange streaks across the fountains and flagpoles. The crowd pressed in tight, shoulder to shoulder, their eyes fixed on the platform beneath the towering monument. At its center stood Marcus Johnson, tall, composed, and commanding. His deep brown eyes scanned the crowd, not with arrogance, but reverence. 20 years ago, he began, voice firm but warm. They said our neighborhoods were lost, but I've seen what happens when we refuse to be written off. Applause surged. The wind picked up, fluttering the edge of his black coat as if the very city breathed through him. Children perched on shoulders, elders wiped quiet tears, and volunteers passed bottled water through the lines. The chant had echoed all day. Unity, dignity, justice. And still, just a few blocks away, in the dark interior of an icy transport van, Agent Michael Stone adjusted his Kevlar vest and stared coldly at a grainy phone photo. "Black male, 6 feet, disturbance in a public space," he muttered. The van jerked as it rounded the final turn. Stone didn't ask for more details. He didn't need them. Back in the park, Marcus paused mid-speech. Something, a ripple of unease, moved through the crowd. He caught a glimpse of flashing blue through the trees. Not APD, not security. ICE. He kept talking. That's what leaders do. Justice isn't handed down, he said. It's built by those who stay standing when others are forced to kneel. But then a voice cut through the air like a gunshot. "Papers, now!" Gasps scattered the crowd. Agent Stone pushed through, badge outstretched like a weapon. "You, ID, now!" Marcus turned slowly, calmly. "Sir, I'm a U.S. citizen, a community leader. This is a peaceful rally." Stone smirked. "Sure you are. You fit the description." Cameras rose. Mothers clutched children's hands tighter. Jamal, a young protester in a red hoodie, shouted, "He's our leader! That's Marcus Johnson!" But Stone wasn't listening. Behind Marcus, the mural of civil rights heroes painted across the fountain shimmered in the golden light. His shadow fell across the face of Dr. King. "I have nothing to hide," Marcus said. Stone stepped closer. "You're making it worse for yourself." Marcus didn't move. "Then maybe it was always going to be this way." The ICE team surrounded him. People yelled. Phones filmed. Stone barked to his agents, "Detain him!" The cuffs clicked tight around Marcus's wrists, and as the sun dipped beneath the skyline, Atlanta held its breath. Was this justice? Or just history repeating itself? And what happens when the system silences the one man meant to protect the people's voice? Stay with us. The fight is only beginning. Crowds still murmured in shock as Marcus was led away, cuffs tight and head held high. The sun had barely dipped when whispers turned into confusion, and confusion into rage. People didn't just witness a man arrested. They saw a pillar of their city fall in chains. Hours earlier, Marcus Johnson had walked into that park with nothing but his notes, his voice, and 20 years of battles behind him. He wasn't new to injustice, but he'd never expected to be targeted while delivering a message of hope. Born and raised in the West End of Atlanta, Marcus had spent 2 decades fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. He started by tutoring kids in overcrowded classrooms. Later, he led anti-violence campaigns in neighborhoods abandoned by funding but full of life. He'd stopped a grocery store from closing down in Vine City. He'd comforted grieving mothers, mentored lost teens, stood in council chambers where people barely acknowledged his presence, and never once did he let that silence break him. In 2024, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution honored him with their Civil Pillar Award. In his speech, he didn't mention the honor. Instead, he looked straight into the camera and said, "Stand for justice, no matter the cost." That clip would become a rallying cry. But not yet. Now, he sat in the back of an ICE vehicle, wrists aching, blood drying under his nose. He didn't ask questions, he didn't beg. He simply breathed, slowly, quietly, preparing. Back at the park, Jamal stood still. His hands trembled around the phone that had just captured everything. The sudden shove, the punch, the cuffs, the silence. "They just took Marcus," he whispered. "They really took him." He pressed upload. Across town, a school principal locked her office, holding back tears. A bus driver slammed his brakes harder than usual. An elderly woman turned up her radio and whispered, "Not again." Marcus had always said, "If they can come for me, they can come for any of us." And now they had. But they didn't know Marcus didn't lead alone. They didn't know Atlanta knew his name. And they didn't know that while they dragged one man away, they'd just woken thousands. What Icy thought was an arrest was actually the spark. And tomorrow, the city would burn bright with voices they couldn't silence. Jamal's video had barely started uploading when Marcus stepped back up to the mic, unaware of the storm already forming behind the trees. The crowd's energy rose again, swelling with hope, with purpose. But Marcus, though calm, could feel something shifting. The air felt tighter, the cheers a bit more frantic. And even as he smiled back at the young man shouting, "You're our hero, Marcus," he scanned the crowd with quiet urgency. It wasn't paranoia. It was instinct. "I stand here today," he said, pacing the edge of the stage, "not because I've never been afraid, but because I've learned what fear does when we let it rule us." Cheers again. But now some heads turned. People whispering. Marcus caught it, a ripple of heads swiveling east. He didn't miss a beat. "We have fought red lines and closed schools. We have marched in rain, in pain, and we are still here." Jamal was recording again. Look at him. He's calm. He knows. Behind the stage, beneath a row of whispering oak trees, Agent Michael Stone moved like a man with something to prove. Ice vest zipped high, eyes narrow. He wasn't interested in speeches. He was here to make someone disappear. He tapped his earpiece. "Target acquired." Marcus paused mid-sentence, looking toward the noise just off stage. Boots, radios, an unmistakable presence in the soil. He adjusted his tie, but not from nerves. From resolve. "This park has seen history," he said. "It's seen blood, it's heard prayers, and it remembers. Every brick here remembers." Gasps fluttered through the audience. Stone appeared, pushing past a volunteer. His voice cut through everything. "Marcus Johnson, present identification, now." Marcus turned to face him. "You're interrupting a legal rally." Stone's jaw tightened. "Papers, immediately." "I'm a U.S. citizen," Marcus said, stepping off the platform. "I live in the West End. I lead the Community First Initiative. I am not undocumented." Stone raised his hand like he was swatting a fly. "Citizen? Not likely." The crowd shifted from curious to furious. Phones came out again. Whispers turned to murmurs. Jamal shouted, "He belongs here more than any of you." Marcus stood still, not moving. "You're making a mistake." Stone smirked, stepping closer. "Then prove me wrong." Marcus's eyes didn't blink. "You don't get to erase someone just because you don't understand him." The park fell quiet. Tension hung like fog. Stone's fingers flexed. And in that silence, something ancient stirred. A collective memory of injustice. Someone yelled, "Don't touch him!" But Stone didn't stop. He moved in, rage flickering just beneath control, and Marcus, still on steady feet, didn't step back. What happens when a man stands taller than fear? What happens when the system misreads its target? The next moment would answer everything. The crowd gasped as Agent Michael Stone stormed into the heart of the rally, his boots grinding gravel, his presence slicing through the peace like a blade. Marcus turned from the mic, calm as ever. His hands remained at his sides, his expression unreadable. "I said, papers. Now," Stone barked, loud enough to silence the drums and chants. Marcus stepped down from the stage, slow and measured. "Sir, I'm a citizen. My name is Marcus Johnson. I live here. I serve here." Stone's eyes flicked to his clipboard, then back to Marcus's skin. "Citizen? Not likely." The crowd tensed. Protesters exchanged nervous glances. "I'm the director of the Community First Initiative," Marcus said evenly. "I've met with city officials. Check your records." "Don't need to," Stone snapped. "You're coming with us." Cameras clicked. Phones rose. A little boy whispered to his mother, "Mama, why are they yelling at Mr. Marcus?" Marcus held his ground, posture straight, voice steady. "You're making a mistake." Stone stepped forward, close enough to smell the heat on Marcus's skin. "The only mistake is letting someone like you slip through the cracks." Marcus didn't flinch. "Someone like me?" "You heard me," Stone said, his tone ice and insult wrapped in one. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "Sir," Marcus said, quieter now, "we don't need to do this here. This is a peaceful rally." Stone's voice dropped, mocking. "Peaceful? You call this peaceful?" Marcus's jaw tensed. "You know what this is? This is a mirror. That's why you hate it." Stone's hand twitched near his belt. His voice rose. "Last warning," Jamal shouted from the crowd. "He didn't do anything." Stone turned. "Stay out of this." Marcus raised his hands. "Let the cameras roll. If you're going to arrest someone, at least let the world see how you do it." The agents behind Stone hesitated. One looked unsure, but Stone was locked in. "Resisting identification," he muttered. "That's enough." He lunged forward, one hand reaching for Marcus's arm, the other pulling out a pair of cuffs. But Marcus stepped slightly aside, not running, not fighting, just refusing to fold. The crowd roared. Stone lost patience. His fist swung, hard and fast. Marcus ducked. A reflex. The punch missed, but everything else landed. Silence cracked into chaos. And Marcus Johnson stood taller than ever, still uncuffed, still unbroken. Yet the weight of injustice had just drawn its first blow. The question was no longer whether they'd arrest him. The question was, how far would this system go to silence a man built to lead? Stone's fist missed its mark, but the message was clear. He wasn't here for truth. He was here to dominate. Without hesitation, he barked, "Cuff him!" Marcus stood tall, hands still at his sides. "I work for Atlanta's people. My record is public. My life is public. You know who I am." Stone didn't blink. "You're a fraud," he spat, waving off the hesitation of one of his younger agents. "Now!" Two agents stepped in. One grabbed Marcus's arm, the other yanked it behind his back. The crowd roared in protest. "Wait! Wait!" someone screamed. "This is wrong!" Marcus didn't resist. His gaze locked on Stone's face. "You want shame. You'll wear it longer than these cuffs." Stone's face twisted. "Shut him up." Jamal surged forward through the crowd. "I'm filming all of it. You hear me?" But Stone was past caring. He nodded. One of the agents shoved Marcus forward. The metal cuffs clamped tight around his wrists, cutting deep. The kind of tight that wasn't about security. It was about pain. Marcus winced, blood dripping from one nostril where a knuckle had clipped him during the scuffle. Stone leaned in, voice low but cruel. "You're not a leader. You're an agitator. And today, you met the wall." "Then I'll become the mirror," Marcus said through gritted teeth. A woman in the crowd cried out, "That's Marcus Johnson, you cowards!" The agents started walking him toward the ICE vehicle waiting at the edge of the park. The crowd surged but couldn't break the circle of uniforms. Jamal's phone stayed raised. "We got you, Marcus. They won't bury this." Agent Anna Lee, standing just behind Stone, looked like her lungs had turned to glass. Her hands trembled at her sides. Her mouth opened to speak, but closed again. A little girl near the front cried into her mother's coat. "Why are they hurting the nice man?" No answer. Just the sound of zip ties, the crackle of radios, and the dull thud of a man being shoved into a van. Inside, the door slammed shut. Marcus sat upright, shoulders pinned to cold metal. His hands throbbed. His nose bled. But his spirit didn't move. He whispered to himself, "Don't break. Not now." And outside, someone pressed upload. The world was about to see what happens when you lay hands on a man the people already crowned. The question wasn't if the truth would come out. It was how loud it would be when it did. Marcus sat cuffed, blood dripping down his nose, soaking into the collar of his shirt. His wrists burned from the metal biting in, too tight by design. Around him, the crowd shouted, cried, pleaded, but none of it slowed Agent Stone. "Shut up, black agitator!" Stone yelled, his voice thick with venom. "You want a platform? You just got one." Jamal pushed to the front, camera still rolling. "Stop! He's our leader. He didn't do anything." Stone turned on him. "Back up, or you're next." But Jamal didn't flinch. "The whole world's watching, man. Keep talking." Marcus didn't speak. He kept his head high despite the blood and humiliation. He had known this moment was always possible. That's the price of telling the truth when the system's built on lies. Agent Anna Lee stood frozen near the perimeter, eyes wide, lips parted. Her training screamed obedience, but her gut twisted at what she was watching. Her hand hovered near her holstered radio. One of the other agents whispered, "Anna, help with transport." She didn't move. Stone barked at her without turning. "Get your damn head in the game, Lee. We're not debating this." Her fingers trembled. She looked at Marcus, his eyes locked with hers. Not pleading, just calm. Resigned, maybe, but not broken. The cuffs, the blood, the silence, it all screamed injustice. The roar of the crowd grew louder as the van doors swung open. Two agents dragged Marcus by the arms, shoving him into the back. "You'll pay for this!" someone screamed. Stone climbed in after him, slamming the door behind him. Inside the van, Marcus sat quietly, knees spread, breathing steady. Stone leaned in, voice low. "You think they'll save you? They won't. Not this time." Marcus looked up at him. "I don't need saving. You do." Outside, the crowd surged forward, pushing against the barricades. People shouted Marcus's name. Others chanted, "Shame! Shame!" Anna Lee finally stepped back, turned away from the scene and whispered under her breath, "This isn't what I signed up for." The ICE van pulled away. Sirens wailed in the distance. Jamal's video had already hit the cloud. 10,000 views in the first 5 minutes. It would only grow, but for now, the man they had followed, trusted, and believed in was gone. taken like a criminal, bleeding like a sacrifice. And the city had just been handed a reason to rise, because if they could do this to Marcus Johnson in broad daylight, what were they doing in the shadows? The van door slammed shut behind him, sealing Marcus in with the hum of engine noise and the sterile stench of sweat and steel. His hands throbbed from the pressure of the cuffs. Blood still traced a slow line along his upper lip, drying sticky against his skin. The ICE agent across from him stared blankly ahead, silent and unmoved. No words, no eye contact. Marcus closed his eyes. The ride was short, but every bump jolted through his bones. By the time the vehicle rolled to a stop outside the Atlanta Detention Center, the light had faded. The sky was a muddy charcoal, washed in the blue and red flicker of city lights bouncing off razor wire fences. He stepped down from the van, surrounded by 2 agents and silence. Inside, the air was different. Dry, sour, artificial. The walls didn't echo, they swallowed sound. Marcus was processed without ceremony. Fingerprints, shoes off, ID photo snapped with no warning. A guard pushed a brown paper bag of his belongings across a counter and waved him forward. Cell Block C. It was colder there. They shoved open the steel door, revealing a narrow cell with a metal cot, a stained toilet, and walls that reeked of mildew and old desperation. He stepped inside. No questions, no rights read, no explanation. The door clanged shut behind him. He sat on the edge of the cot, head low, breathing slow. A man in the neighboring cell peered through the bars. "You knew?" Marcus nodded. "What they say you did?" Marcus wiped the dried blood from under his nose. "Tried to lead a rally." The man chuckled, but it wasn't amused. "That's dangerous these days." He leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes again. Not to sleep, but to remember. Faces, names. Kids from the West End who'd followed him into better lives. Mothers he'd stood beside at funeral vigils. Elders who called him son with pride in their voice. He whispered to himself, "You won't break here." Outside his cell, distant cries echoed. Murmured prayers, curses, pleas. A woman somewhere shouted, "I've been here 5 days. I need a lawyer." No one answered. Marcus sat still, unblinking. This wasn't new, just another battleground. Back in the park, they tried to silence his voice. Now they'd given him something stronger, something the system could never contain. A symbol. Handcuffs weren't just metal, they were a mirror. And tonight, Marcus Johnson was about to reflect something too big to ignore. He looked up at the ceiling and whispered the words he used to tell every young man who walked into his office ready to give up. "They can lock the door, but not your mind." And far outside those concrete walls, a city was beginning to stir. Because the man they thought they buried in chains was just getting started. Word of Marcus's arrest spread like wildfire, but it was Jamal's video that poured gasoline on the flames. Uploaded just minutes after Marcus was hauled off in cuffs, the clip opened with the Stone's voice barking, "Shut up, black agitator." It captured the punch, the blood, the way Marcus never resisted, and how Stone tightened those cuffs with a grin. By the next morning, it had hit 2 million views. The hashtags were everywhere. #FreeMarcus, #JusticeForJohnson, #AtlantaRising. At Centennial Olympic Park, people gathered again. Only this time it wasn't for a speech, it was for a fight. Banners waved in the wind. "Let him go." "We know Marcus." "ICE can't silence truth." And right in the middle stood Jamal, holding a hand-lettered sign that read, "I filmed it. Now we act." News crews rolled in. Helicopters buzzed above. College students marched in from Clark Atlanta, Morehouse, and Spelman. Faith leaders locked arms at the front line. Chants filled the air. "He stood for us. We stand for him." An older woman near the steps held a photo of Marcus shaking hands with her late son, a scholarship recipient from his after-school program. Her voice trembled. "He pulled my boy out of a grave and into college. They can't bury him now." Meanwhile, across town, ICE headquarters was sealed tight. Agent Michael Stone sat in a dim conference room, chin high, unbothered. "Let them protest," he told his superior. "They'll forget in a week." But even he couldn't ignore the breaking news on every screen. Community icon detained. IC faces scrutiny. Atlanta demands answers. Civil rights groups condemn arrest of beloved activist. Inside the detention center, Marcus sat in silence, eyes closed, his back against cold cement. He didn't know what was happening outside, but he could feel it, like pressure building in the bones of the city. A guard passed by his cell, slowing just enough to glance in. He didn't speak, but he paused. Then another guard, younger, walked by and whispered, "Sir, people out there chanting your name." Marcus opened his eyes, exhaled through his nose. He didn't smile, but the weight in his chest lifted, just a little. That night, the chants didn't stop. The park stayed full. People brought water, food, signs, speakers, and in the middle of it all, Jamal stepped up to the same platform Marcus had been ripped from. He tapped the mic. "My name's Jamal Taylor. I'm nobody. Just a kid from the West End. But Marcus saw something in me. He told me I had a voice, so now I'm using it." The crowd leaned in. "Don't let them make this about one man. Don't let them say this is over. He planted seeds in all of us, and now they're blooming." Cheers erupted, and as the cameras rolled, as hashtags exploded, and news anchors scrambled to keep up, ICE headquarters started to sweat. This wasn't going away. Marcus Johnson had become more than a man. He had become a movement. And now the world was watching. The rally outside the detention center had turned into a round-the-clock demonstration. Tents went up. Media trucks parked like sentinels. Chants never stopped, only shifted rhythm with the night. But it was Marcus's longtime friend, attorney Darnell Rhodes from Savannah, who delivered the first real blow. He arrived in Atlanta with a briefcase full of documents, credentials, and testimonials. His navy blue suit crisp despite the drive. At a press conference under a white canopy just off Peachtree Street, he stepped up to the mic. "My name is Darnell Rhodes," he began. "I've known Marcus Johnson for over 20 years. I've marched with him, built with him, bled with him." Camera shutters fired. "In my hands," Darnell continued, raising a thick folder, "are records proving not only Marcus's citizenship, but his decades of service to this city. From school reform to youth programs, anti-violence initiatives to voter registration drives, this man isn't a threat to public safety. He is public safety." He paused. Let the truth sit heavy. And yet, IC chose to detain him based on an anonymous call and the color of his skin. That ends today. By noon, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution ran the front-page headline, "Black Leader Wrongly Detained by ICE. City Demands Release." Social media lit up again. National figures started tweeting. Civil rights leaders gave interviews. A pastor in D.C. offered his church for rallies. Inside the detention center, a guard slipped Marcus a folded copy of the paper through the bars. He unfolded it slowly, his eyes landing on his own face. Still bruised, still dignified. Beneath it, bold black letters read, "He gave us a voice. We will not be silent." For the first time since his arrest, Marcus allowed himself a breath that reached his lungs. He folded the paper carefully, tucked it into the pocket of his detention jumpsuit, and stood. The same guard nodded slightly. "Phones are blowing up. Word is, something's changing." Marcus nodded back. "It always does, when people rise." Meanwhile, ICE headquarters in Atlanta was under siege by questions, subpoenas, and internal unrest. Stone leaned against a conference room wall, arms crossed. "I followed protocol," he snapped to a federal investigator. The agent didn't even look up. "We're reviewing everything, from the call, to the footage, to your record." Stone's smirk cracked. Later that night, back at the Protest camp, Jamal sat under a string of solar lights watching as local artists painted a towering mural of Marcus, his fist raised, his eyes calm. Beside him, a woman whispered, "My son was in Marcus's reading group. He taught him to believe he was more than just a statistic." Jamal replied, "They thought locking him up would silence him, but now he's everywhere." The mural wasn't just paint, it was memory, it was resistance, and it was proof. Marcus Johnson was no longer just a man behind bars. He was the face of a movement that had just found its fire, because now the truth had a name, and it was marching straight through ICE's front door. The city was on fire with voices, and Agent Anna Lee couldn't sleep. She sat alone in her car outside the detention center, engine off, palms tight around the steering wheel. Her radio still crackled with the latest ICE dispatches, but her thoughts screamed louder. Marcus's voice echoed in her memory. Calm, unbending, dignified, even with blood on his face. She remembered Stone's voice, too, barking, spitting, smiling like it was sport. Anna had joined ICE to protect borders, not to cross lines of justice, but now that line was a blur, smeared in racial bias and silence. She opened her phone, stared at the video Jamal had posted, watched it again, and again. Then she did something she'd never done before. She hit record. "My name is Anna Lee. I'm an ICE field agent, badge number 91247. I was there the day Marcus Johnson was arrested. I didn't stop it, and I regret that." She inhaled, looked into the camera like she was staring at herself in the mirror. Agent Michael Stone received a tip, a vague one. No verification, no protocol, just a black man in a crowd. And Stone said, "He fits." Tears welled in her eyes. He targeted Marcus because of his skin, not his actions. He hit him, tightened those cuffs like it was punishment. This wasn't law. It was ego. It was racism. She sent the video to WSB-TV, then to Channel 11, and finally, she uploaded it. Public. She slumped back in the driver's seat, eyes shut. Let the weight settle. It didn't take long. The leak exploded across Atlanta. ICE agent breaks silence, racial targeting. Exposed. Marcus Johnson's arrest was no mistake. It was malice. News vans spun back toward federal buildings. Protesters outside the detention center erupted in renewed chants. Inside, a guard rushed to Marcus's cell. "You seeing this?" he asked, holding out a phone through the bars. Marcus watched the video, still and expressionless, but his eyes burned. Anna's voice rang through the footage. "I can't stay silent anymore." He whispered, "Then neither can they." At ICE headquarters, chaos struck like thunder. Phones rang off the hook. DOJ investigators were on the line. Stone sat stiff in a windowless office. His face flushed, fists clenched. "She's lying," he said through gritted teeth, but nobody nodded. That evening, Jamal took the stage at the now iconic protest site. "We told y'all this wasn't just one man. Now even ICE agents are saying it." The crowd roared, and beneath that roar was something deeper, something turning. The wind shifted, because the truth wasn't just out, it was undeniable, and the chains Marcus wore were no longer holding him back. They were dragging a corrupt system straight into the light. The leak shattered the silence, and the world demanded action. Under mounting pressure from the media, civil rights groups, and even members of Congress, ICE had no choice. On the third day, they released Marcus Johnson. The sun had just broken through thick Georgia clouds when the detention doors opened. Marcus stepped out slowly, blinking at the light. His nose still bore the faint bruise. The marks from the cuffs were raw on his wrists. But his posture? Unshaken. Tall, steady. Crowds had gathered at Centennial Park once more. It wasn't a protest this time. It was a welcome home. When the black SUV carrying Marcus pulled into the lot, the crowd surged forward like a tide. Cheers, tears, raised fists, and flashing cameras, all meeting the moment. Jamal ran to the front, arms trembling, his phone forgotten in his pocket. He stood still as Marcus stepped out, then whispered, "You made it." Marcus placed a hand on his shoulder. "No, we made it." Reporters shouted questions. Mics reached forward like grasping hands. But Marcus didn't speak until he stood at the same podium where his voice had been silenced 3 days earlier. He looked out at thousands of faces, young, old, black, white, every corner of Atlanta gathered beneath one sky. He cleared his throat. 3 days ago, I stood here speaking about unity, justice, and the power of community. He paused. Let the quiet wrap around his words. Then I was silenced, bruised, shackled. Not because I broke a law, but because I broke a pattern. I refused to be quiet. I refused to look away, and so they tried to remove me. The crowd held its breath. But you all stood taller than fear. You marched. You shouted. You showed up. Applause exploded like thunder. And today, I am not broken. I am not bitter. I am back. Camera crews zoomed in, networks broadcast live. People watched from classrooms, barbershops, kitchens across the country. Marcus gripped the edges of the podium. I didn't survive those cold walls to return with hate. I came back with purpose. He lifted his wrist, still bruised. This, he said, this is no longer a wound. It's a warning. To every system that thrives on silence, we are not afraid. Chants rose again. Justice! 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 Behind Marcus, Jamal cried. So did Darnell Rhodes. Even Anna Lee, watching from a distance in plain clothes, wept silently. Marcus looked to the sky. The clouds had fully cleared now, sunlight pouring over the crowd like grace. He ended simply, "Community is our strength. Justice is our foundation. And truth is our weapon." He stepped back. The roar that followed didn't stop. Not for minutes. Not until people realized this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. Because Marcus Johnson had been returned to them, scarred but stronger, and the next battle was already waiting. Cheers still echoed in Marcus's ears as the crowd slowly dispersed from Centennial Park. But he wasn't celebrating. Not yet. That night, alone in his small apartment on Auburn Avenue, he sat at his kitchen table surrounded by folders, letters, and the weight of unfinished battles. The handcuff marks on his wrists were fading, but the pain they represented pulsed deeper than bone. He traced the edge of the AJC newspaper with his fingers. His photo, front and center, next to the words, "Voice of Atlanta Walks Free." But freedom wasn't enough. Marcus opened a worn journal and began scribbling names. Not of enemies, but of the forgotten. Carlos Mendez, detained last spring, no lawyer. Marcia Lee, separated from her child at intake. Yusuf, deported despite having lived here since age 4. He whispered their names like prayers. A knock came at the door. Jamal stepped in, face still flushed from the rally. "You good?" Marcus nodded. "Better now, but we've got work to do." Jamal sat. "I figured. I brought files, messages, people reaching out. They want to meet, want to help." Marcus looked up. "Then let's build something real, not just a reaction, a response." Over the next few days, Marcus met with pastors, public defenders, educators, even former ICE staff. Agent Anna Lee sent word quietly, offering to testify if needed. They started forming a coalition, Justice Forward, a grassroots initiative to monitor detentions, provide rapid legal aid, and challenge racially motivated IC actions in court. Marcus spoke at community halls, colleges, churches. No teleprompter, just truth. "I didn't survive for sympathy," he said. "I survived to make sure no one disappears into a cell without a name, a lawyer, or a voice." At one event, an elderly woman approached, clutching her grandson's hand. "You saved him once. After-school program 3 years ago. Now he wants to be a lawyer. The boy grinned. Can I join Justice Forward someday? Marcus smiled. You already have. In D.C., ICE officials held frantic meetings. The Department of Justice launched an internal audit. Whistleblowers stepped forward. And Marcus's name, once reduced to a file number, became a symbol in capital discussions. Not as a victim, as a leader. The city of Atlanta named a task force to investigate racial profiling in law enforcement. And through it all, Marcus never missed a night without writing names in that journal. Not numbers, names. Each one, a promise. That under his watch, no one would be forgotten again. Because justice wasn't a moment, it was a mission. And Marcus Johnson had only just begun. The momentum didn't stop after Marcus's speech. If anything, it accelerated. His team filed formal complaints with the Atlanta Civil Rights Bureau. Support poured in from national organizations, and within 48 hours, the first blow landed. Michael Stone was officially suspended without pay. A statement from ICE headquarters read, "Pending internal review and federal inquiry, Agent Michael Stone is removed from active duty." But Marcus wasn't interested in symbolism. He wanted accountability. So he sued. Filed in Fulton County Court, the lawsuit named Agent Stone, ICE leadership, and the department itself. The complaint outlined unlawful detention, racial profiling, excessive force, and violation of First Amendment rights. Attorney Darnell Rhodes stood beside Marcus at the courthouse steps. Cameras flashed. "This is not about revenge," Darnell said. "This is about restoring balance. The law must serve everyone, not just those it favors." Marcus didn't speak until the end, but when he did, his voice was thunder. "I was handcuffed for speaking truth. Today, I speak louder." Inside ICE's Atlanta office, panic spread like smoke. Files were reviewed. Meetings went private. Phones rang non-stop from Washington, D.C., and then the hammer dropped. The Department of Justice launched a federal probe into ICE's practices in the Southeast region. A special counsel from D.C. was assigned. Subpoenas followed. Former detainees, advocates, and even internal ICE staff came forward with testimony. Agent Anna Lee, still reeling from her own role, voluntarily gave a sworn statement. She admitted to witnessing Stone's bias. "I stayed silent too long. I won't again." Meanwhile, Stone's attorneys tried to mount a defense. He followed protocol, they claimed, but footage said otherwise. Witnesses said otherwise. The bruises on Marcus's wrists said otherwise, and the public, they were done listening to excuses. Jamal, now managing Marcus's social outreach, organized nightly community forums. "This isn't just about one man," he said. "It's about who we become when the system fails, and how we fix it." One night, a former detainee took the mic. "They kept me for weeks," she whispered. "No lawyer, no phone call, no explanation. Marcus gave me back my voice." The crowd stood in silence. Then they erupted. Marcus watched from the side, his heart aching and full. He turned to Darnell. "It's not about winning in court, is it?" Darnell smiled faintly. "It's about shifting the ground beneath their feet." By the end of the week, federal investigators had arrived in Atlanta. Stone was summoned to D.C. for questioning. ICE's regional director was replaced, and Marcus? He returned to Centennial Park, alone this time. No cameras, no chance. He walked to the stage where it all began and sat at the edge, legs dangling. He looked at the space where he'd been cuffed, where his blood had fallen. Then he whispered, "One more step." Because it wasn't over yet, but they were listening now. A year later, the sky above Centennial Park was painted with the same fiery streaks as the night Marcus had been cuffed. But now, the air hummed with hope. A stage stood at the park's center, flanked by speakers, flowers, and folding chairs filled with elders, students, pastors, activists, and those who had once felt unseen. Marcus stood at the edge of the crowd, quiet, watching as children ran across the grass, laughing. Jamal approached with a clipboard in hand, now a full-time organizer with Justice Forward. "They're ready for you," Jamal said. Marcus nodded, adjusted his dark blue suit, and made his way to the podium as silence fell over the audience. Reporters raised their cameras. Drones buzzed faintly overhead. And in the front row sat Agent Anna Lee, no longer ICE, now working with Immigrant Legal Aid, next to Marcia Lee and Carlos Mendez. Their cases reopened, their voices returned. A breeze lifted the ends of Marcus's coat as he placed his hands on the podium. "I didn't ask for this journey," he began, voice steady, "but Injustice did." He paused, eyes scanning faces filled with expectation. "I was taken not for who I am, but for what I represent. That's the danger of truth. It shakes the system." Cheers erupted, but Marcus held up a hand. "We still have work to do. This park once echoed with cries for help, but today it stands as proof that when we unite, we win." He turned to his left, where a dark velvet curtain concealed a new plaque set into the brick. Together with Jamal, Anna, and 2 teenage volunteers, he pulled it back. The bronze gleamed in the sun. It read, "Here stood Marcus Johnson, unjustly taken, justly remembered. June 2025. Centennial Park, a place reclaimed by courage." People stood and clapped, many with tears in their eyes. Cameras caught the moment. Live feeds lit up across the country. Marcus raised one fist and said, "This plaque doesn't honor a man. It honors resistance. Let it remind every officer, every leader, and every citizen, justice has a memory." As the crowd chanted #Justice, Marcus stepped down and joined them, no longer on stage, not above, among. The next day, a new headline swept the nation. From victim to vanguard, Marcus Johnson's stand becomes law. A bill, the Johnson Act, proposed mandatory bias audits for all federal law enforcement agencies, backed by bipartisan leaders, inspired by truth. That night, in quiet corners of Atlanta, kids asked who Marcus was, and parents said, "He's the reason we believe change is possible." If this story moved you, share it with someone who still believes in justice, and comment below, what would you stand up for? #Justice starts here. Boston Common. June sun pours through green trees. Birds chirp. A breeze rustles the pages of a thick history book. And on a worn wooden bench sits Samuel Carter, a 50-year-old black professor lost in thought preparing for tomorrow's lecture on civil rights at Harvard. He's not disturbing anyone, just reading, just being. But to one passerby, that's suspicious enough. An ice van creeps to the curb. Doors swing open. Agent Michael Stone steps out, boots crunching the gravel like judgment. "Papers, now!" he barks. Not at a criminal, not at a threat, but at a beloved educator who's helped shape generations of minds. Samuel looks up, calm, dignified. "I'm a U.S. citizen. I teach at Harvard." But Stone's not listening. His eyes don't see a professor, only a black man in the wrong place. The cuffs slam on, tight. Blood trickles from Samuel's wrist as whispers ripple through the crowd. Phones rise. A student shouts, "He's my professor!" But Stone doesn't stop. He didn't know who Samuel Carter really was, and by the time he finds out, it might be too late. Because this isn't just a story of mistaken identity. This is about dignity denied, and a truth too powerful to stay hidden. It's about a system that thought it could crush one man, not knowing that man had a voice millions would soon echo. Can one professor's truth burn through layers of injustice? Can knowledge ignite a fire powerful enough to shake federal walls? Watch and decide. If this makes you pause, share it. If it makes you furious, comment #Justice below and tell us, where are you watching from? June sunlight spilled across Boston Common, dappling the green with gold as wind whispered through the elms older than memory. Birds chirped. Joggers passed. The air buzzed faintly with city life, and the subtle hum of tension few could name. Professor Samuel Carter sat quietly on a bench near the fountain, a well-worn copy of Voices of Freedom open in his lap. His coat, tan and slightly wrinkled, caught the breeze. His pen tapped gently against the margin. At 50, Samuel was lean but strong, the kind of man who carried silence like armor and wore dignity like a second skin. Around him, people strolled. Dogs barked, children chased pigeons, and yet, somehow, he still felt out of place. He wasn't doing anything but reading, preparing tomorrow's lecture on the civil rights movement, the section about freedom denied and fought for in streets just like these. But in this moment, Samuel Carter, Harvard historian and voice of justice, was just a black man alone in a public park. And that, to someone watching from across the way, was reason enough. A 911 call had been placed 20 minutes ago. Suspicious male, possibly undocumented, sitting too long. So when the unmarked ice vehicle rolled into the park's edge, tires soft on gravel, nobody flinched. Not at first. Agent Michael Stone stepped out, tall and pale, eyes hidden behind sunglasses. His vest said DHS. His posture said power. He scanned the green space, then walked briskly toward Samuel. Samuel didn't see him right away. He was underlining a sentence. "Freedom is not given, it is taken." Stone's boots crunched closer. "Sir," he barked, "papers, now!" Samuel looked up, confused but calm. "Excuse me?" "I said identification. You're being questioned under ICE authority." Samuel sat still, pen now resting across the open page. "I'm a U.S. citizen," he said, voice even. "I teach at Harvard University, history department." Stone squinted. "You don't look like a Harvard professor." Several heads turned. A teenager holding a frappuccino paused mid-sip. Samuel exhaled slowly. He reached into his coat, pulled out a black wallet, and offered his Massachusetts ID. Stone took it, glanced once, then snorted. "Fake. It's not." "We've had reports of false documentation," Stone said, stepping closer. "You're matching a description." "What description?" Samuel asked, still seated. Stone didn't answer. The crowd didn't speak. But they watched now. Samuel slowly stood, taller than Stone had expected, eyes calm but steady. "I am Professor Samuel Elijah Carter," he said, "born in Baltimore, tenured at Harvard. I've worked in this city for 30 years. Stone narrowed his eyes. "If that's true, you won't mind stepping into the van." Samuel didn't move. "Am I under arrest?" Stone gritted his teeth. "You're being detained." "For what?" "Probable cause." "For reading a book?" The tension in the air grew visible. Stone reached for his radio. "Unit Alpha, confirm status, bringing in a possible." Samuel looked down at his book, then back at Stone. "I suggest you call Harvard," he said. But Stone didn't. He stepped forward, hand hovering over his cuffs. "I suggest you cooperate," Stone growled. Samuel didn't back away. He stood his ground, voice unwavering. "This is racial profiling." Stone smirked. "This is protocol." And then, without warning, Stone's hand lashed out, aiming for Samuel's chest. Samuel sidestepped. The book hit the ground, and everything went quiet. For a single, breathless moment, the sun shone down on the fallen pages of a civil rights lecture, and on a professor whose dignity was now under siege. The fight for truth had just begun. The book hit the dirt, and with it, so did the peace. Samuel Carter stood still, his breath calm, though the veins in his neck pulsed like distant drums. Around him, murmurs swept the park. Phones lifted. A mother pulled her child closer. One man muttered, "What's going on?" but didn't step forward. Samuel didn't flinch, but inside an old ache stirred, the one that came from watching truth be questioned for wearing the wrong skin. Most knew his name. His students, hundreds strong, called him a legend, a man who made history bleed through chalkboards and into hearts. 30 years of lectures, 30 years of dignity, 30 years of telling young minds, the truth will not defend itself. You must. But today, truth wasn't enough. Michael Stone didn't see a professor. He saw a target. "Hands behind your back, now." "I've done nothing wrong," Samuel replied. "Call Harvard. Confirm who I am." "I don't need confirmation," Stone spat. "I need compliance." From behind, 2 more agents appeared, one young, barely 25, and the other Agent Anna Lee, a Korean-American woman whose eyes shifted with quiet hesitation. Samuel glanced toward her. "You believe in this?" She didn't answer. Stone stepped in, snapped the cuffs cold and tight. Samuel winced. Not from the steel, but from the message. These weren't just cuffs. They were symbols. Symbols that whispered, "We don't care who you are, just what you look like." He stood tall, even as blood trickled from his wrist, spotting the page from his book still lying open, the quote facing skyward. "Freedom denied anywhere is justice threatened everywhere." A familiar voice rang out. "Professor Carter?" Sarah Miles, a sophomore political science major, ran toward the scene, phone in hand. Her voice cracked. "He's a professor at Harvard." "Back up, miss," Stone barked. "You're making a mistake," she shouted. "This is racial profiling." Stone motioned to the other agents. "Secure the perimeter." "Are you serious?" Sarah yelled, already filming. "This is going online, now." Samuel turned his head slightly, blood on his temple from where Stone had shoved him against the bench post. "Keep recording," he said softly. Agent Lee stood frozen. Her gloved hands trembled. Stone snapped, "Get him in the van." But Samuel didn't move. He didn't resist. He didn't shout. He walked. Slow, back straight, cuffs slicing into skin, as if each step were a refusal to be small. The van door slammed. Sarah stood shaking, tears mixing with rage. "You don't get to erase people," she whispered. But Stone already looked past her, eyes scanning the crowd like a hunter daring anyone to speak up. Nobody did. Not yet. Back on the bench, the history book lay open, its pages fluttering in the breeze like a flag raised in quiet defiance. The cuffs had sliced into his wrists, but Samuel never lowered his gaze. Inside the ice van, the steel walls pressed in like silence thick enough to swallow reason. He sat on the cold bench, hands bound, back straight, every bump in the road jarring against bone and pride. He could still hear Sarah's voice. "He's a professor!" echoing over the roar of closing doors. And in that moment, Samuel Carter, the man who'd taught thousands to recognize injustice, became another black man transported like contraband. The ride was short, but the weight of it stretched time. No words were spoken. Stone rode up front, smug. Agent Anna Lee sat across from Samuel, eyes locked on her boots. When they arrived, the gates clanged open like a warning. Concrete swallowed light. Samuel was walked through metal detectors, stripped of his jacket, and processed under fluorescent bulbs that buzzed louder than the guards. His fingerprints were taken. Again and again. A young ICE officer in a gray shirt asked with a smirk, "You sure you're not from overseas?" "I'm sure," Samuel said calmly. "Baltimore, born and raised." "Yeah," the man replied, tapping at the keyboard. "Heard that one before." They led him to a holding cell no bigger than a dorm closet. Only this one smelled of bleach, sweat, and something ancient. The cot was bolted to the wall. The air was stale. In the corner, a man in his 20s shivered under a thin blanket. When Samuel stepped in, the man glanced up, eyes red, lips cracked, fear etched across his face. "First time?" the man asked. Samuel nodded once. "And you?" "Third," the man whispered. "They keep forgetting I have papers." They fell into silence. Outside, footsteps echoed. Somewhere, someone cried out. Samuel sat, stiff. He thought of the quote he had underlined that morning. He could see the page, hear the words. "Silence in the face of injustice is complicity." He closed his eyes. 3 decades teaching civil rights. He had warned his students, "They will not ask for your resume when they see your skin. They will not look for your degrees. They will see your presence as provocation." Now, here he was. Proof. Hours passed, maybe more. A tray slid through the door, cold rice and watery beans. Samuel didn't touch it. Instead, he stood and faced the steel mirror, studying the blood dried along his wrist. He whispered to himself, "This is not the end. This is the lesson." And then he sat down, pulled a napkin from the tray, and with the dull edge of a plastic spoon, he began etching words into its surface, not just to remember, but to teach. Inside the cell, Samuel etched words onto a napkin with the dull edge of a spoon, his voice reduced but not silenced. Outside, Boston was waking up to outrage. Sarah Miles had uploaded the video before sundown. The title was simple. Harvard professor arrested in Boston Common. ICE got the wrong man. It was shaky, raw, and unmistakable. Stone's voice, brutal. Samuel's dignity, unmistakable. The blood on his wrists, unforgivable. Within hours, it racked up 2 million views. By morning, it was everywhere. In dorm rooms and coffee shops, students gathered around screens, jaws tight. News anchors replayed the clip in slow motion, analyzing Stone's expression, Samuel's calm resistance, and the chilling slur. Filthy black scholar. Harvard's campus was already buzzing when Professor Ellis, chair of the history department, called an emergency faculty meeting. "This isn't just about one of our own," he said, voice shaking. "This is about every scholar of color who's ever walked through these gates wondering if their degree could shield their skin." Sarah was there too, seated in the back, arms crossed, face pale from sleepless fury. She had spent the night reposting the clip, tagging journalists, calling professors, and answering interview requests she never wanted. She stood. "He taught us to speak truth to power. Now it's our turn." By 10 a.m., flyers littered Harvard Yard. Protest. Noon. Science Center Plaza. Free Professor Carter. They came in droves. students, professors, alumni, and neighbors. Some carried signs. Justice teaches. Knowledge isn't a threat. ICE. You got the wrong scholar. The chants were clear, rhythmic, relentless. Free! Professor! Carter! At the detention center, Samuel couldn't hear them, but the guards could. One flinched as the echoes reached the concrete. Inside her cubicle at the Icefield office, Agent Anna Lee stared at her screen. The headline burned. Harvard professor detained. IC under fire. She clicked play. There it was. Stone's voice, barking. Samuel's hands twisted behind his back. Her own face visible in the corner. Frozen. Helpless. Her fingers hovered over the mouse, then opened an email draft. Subject, Incident Report. Boston, Common Detainment. She hesitated. Her cursor blinked. Then she hit delete. Instead, she picked up her phone. Not to call a supervisor, but to call WBZ TV Channel 4. Across the city, law firms buzzed. One in particular, Glassman and Avery, was already preparing a civil rights response. Attorney Daniel Avery leaned over a file folder stamped Carter, S.E. He shook his head. They messed with the wrong man. He'd known Samuel for years, had shared panels with him, sat beside him on a civil liberties task force. Samuel had once helped get a student's DACA status renewed after a bureaucratic dead end. Now, Daniel would return the favor. He called in a favor from a judge. We need this man out, and we need him out now. As the sun set again over Boston, the square outside the detention center filled with more people. A silent protest now. Candles flickering. Photos of Samuel taped to the fences. Quotes from his lectures written in chalk on the sidewalk. Dignity is not requested. It is owned. A young girl knelt beside a flickering votive. Her mother whispered, "That man taught your uncle. He changed his life." Inside, Samuel sat in stillness. He didn't yet know a movement had begun. Protests were building across Harvard, but inside the detention center, Professor Samuel Carter faced something far colder than the spring wind outside. Stone had labeled him a fraud. Now he wanted humiliation. The door creaked open. Boots echoed. Agent Michael Stone stepped in, followed by two guards. He looked like a man who enjoyed being right, even when he was wrong. "Still claiming to be a professor?" Stone said, walking slowly around the cell. "You people always got a story." Samuel sat still, his back straight. "You can check the university records." Stone scoffed. "Oh, I did. Just got off the phone with the clerk. No one answered. Funny how that happens." "You're lying," Samuel said softly. Stone grinned. "Let me tell you something, Carter. You don't talk your way out of here. You prove yourself, and I don't see any degrees on you." He signaled the guard. The man stepped forward and yanked Samuel up. The cuffs hadn't been adjusted. They bit deeper. Blood traced a slow, dark path down Samuel's wrist. Still, Samuel didn't flinch. "You assaulted me," he said plainly. "There are witnesses, cameras." Stone stepped closer, voice low and bitter. "You think a Harvard name gives you armor? You're just another mouth with a story." Behind him, Agent Anna Lee lingered in the hallway, arms crossed, face pale. She had seen the video, she had heard the slur, filthy, black scholar. And now, that phrase echoed in her mind like a shame she couldn't unhear. "Michael," she called out, stepping inside. "That's enough." Stone turned. "Excuse me?" "We have a process," she said. "You're breaking it." Stone approached her, lowering his voice. "You sure you want to do this, Lee? You want to stand on that side?" She didn't reply. Inside the cell, Samuel spoke again. "You want to test who I am? Go to room 302 in Robinson Hall. Open the lectern drawer. You'll find the manuscript draft of my next book, and the syllabus I wrote for 300 students. Stone laughed, a harsh sound. "You think I care about your lectures?" But Lee was already typing something into her phone. A quick search, a name, a photo. Her screen lit up. She looked back at Stone, her voice quiet but firm. "Michael, he's telling the truth." Stone's jaw tightened. "You don't know that." "I do," she said, holding up the screen. "Samuel Elijah Carter, Harvard faculty, Ph.D. from Yale, published author, guest speaker at the Library of Congress." Stone said nothing. Samuel raised his cuffed hand slightly. "So, am I still suspicious or just inconvenient?" Stone's eyes narrowed. "You don't talk to me like that. You already laid hands on me. There's not much left to strip," Samuel said, steady as stone. Lee turned to the guard. "He needs medical treatment. Now." "No, he doesn't," Stone snapped. But the guard hesitated, looked at Samuel's bleeding wrists, then at Lee, and moved. Stone stormed out of the room. Samuel sat again on the cot, breathing through pain. He whispered to no one. When truth hurts, they try to silence the voice first. Anna Lee stood at the door, watching him. Something cracked inside her, the sound of a lie unraveling. Anna Lee stood frozen at the threshold, watching Samuel's blood streak along the cuffs. Something in her cracked. She'd seen enough. An hour later, she sat in her car, engine off, heart pounding in the quiet. Her hands hovered over the phone, then finally, she tapped WBZ-TV. It rang once. "Channel 4 newsroom," the voice said. "I have information about the Carter detainment," Anna whispered. "I can't stay silent." Earlier that day, Stone had erupted in another meeting, slamming a folder on the table. "You're all scared of optics while this guy plays scholar. He's a fraud." But Anna knew better. She had gone home the night before and watched every lecture she could find. Samuel Carter's voice echoing through the chambers of YouTube like thunder in marble halls. His words were fierce, focused, measured. A man who taught justice like it was scripture. Now she was staring at her reflection in the driver's window, tears streaming silently. "I stood there," she said to the reporter. "I saw it. The slur, the force, the cuffs. There was no threat, only bias." The reporter asked for proof. Anna forwarded the body cam timestamps. "That'll shake things," the reporter said. "I hope it shakes more than that," Anna replied. "I hope it burns." Meanwhile, inside the detention center, Samuel sat wrapped in silence. His wrists were bandaged now, his body sore, but his spirit unbowed. He heard a voice from the hallway, a whisper between two guards. "Did you see the news? His credentials are real. Harvard's rioting. They say there's protests outside." He closed his eyes and exhaled, slowly. Then a voice called through the door. "Mr. Carter, someone's coming to see you." Back at Harvard, Sarah Miles stood at the center of the crowd, holding up a poster of Samuel with the words, "He taught us to rise, so now we rise for him." The chant swelled again. "Free! Professor Carter!" A television in a coffee shop buzzed to life. Breaking news. ICE. Agent leaked internal complaint, alleging racial targeting in Boston. Detainment of Harvard Professor Stone saw it first in the IC conference room. The color drained from his face as the screen flashed his name in bold. Michael Stone, under internal review. He slammed the remote down, but the silence from his colleagues was louder than any protest. Outside, the fences of the detention center trembled under the roar of voices growing by the minute. Not just Harvard students now, BU, MIT, Northeastern, even local high schoolers. Inside, Samuel heard them. He whispered to the guard, "History doesn't knock, it breaks down doors." Samuel Carter had become the name on every screen, every protest sign, every news ticker, but inside the detention center, he was just detainee number 64371. They moved him before sunrise, quietly, deliberately. No explanation, no notice. Just two guards, a metal door, and the clank of keys that sounded like a gavel. They led him through an unmarked corridor, past flickering lights and sealed doors, until they reached a solitary cell far from the others. Isolation. Protocol, one of them muttered. The other didn't look him in the eye. Samuel stepped in. No window, no clock, just concrete, a metal bench, and a camera in the ceiling's corner. They closed the door. The lock thudded like the final note of a cruel song. He sat. The stillness didn't scare him. He had known silence before, on battlefields of protest, in classrooms empty after storms. But this silence was weaponized, designed to erase. He closed his eyes and breathed, in through the nose, out through the pain, in through the history, out through the lie. His fingers twitched. The bandages were tight. The cuffs had done their work. He pictured his students. Sarah, the young boy who once waited after class just to say thank you. He remembered telling them, "They will try to unmake you with silence. That's when you speak with your existence." So he stood, and he sang. Not loudly, not defiantly, just low enough to reach the walls. "Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around." The old spirituals, the ones he taught in his lectures, songs from the chains, from the marches, from the prisons that came before this one. It wasn't long before the guard outside turned his head. Then another stepped closer. They heard it too. In the ICE regional office upstairs, Agent Lee sat at her desk scrolling through the latest press blast. "Professor in isolation. Outrage builds." She grabbed her badge and walked straight to the director's office. "This is retaliation," she said. "I leaked the truth, and now they've buried him." The director looked up slowly. "We're following containment protocol." "Containment?" she snapped. "He's not a virus. He's a scholar." Outside, thousands were now gathered across Harvard Square and Boston Common. Candlelight vigils burned through the fog. A local gospel choir sang the same song Samuel hummed behind steel. Reporters swarmed. One of Samuel's colleagues, Dr. Miles Hartford, stepped forward on a live feed. "This is not just an arrest. This is erasure. They took our brightest light and shoved him into shadow." Back inside the concrete box, Samuel sat again. His voice was hoarse, but his heart beat steady. The guard unlocked the slot and slid in a tray of food. Samuel didn't move. He didn't eat. He stared at the reflection in the tray's metal, saw his own face warped in the steel. Then slowly, he whispered, "I exist, and I am not alone." The camera blinked red. Recording. Samuel Carter sat in silence, isolated from the world, while outside, his story was breaking through every screen in America. Sarah Miles hadn't stopped moving in over 36 hours. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Calls from CNN, NBC, podcasts, activists, professors, but she only cared about one thing. "Free him," she told every camera pointed at her. "That's Professor Carter. That man shaped my mind. He gave me a future. Now we give him ours." The video of his arrest had passed 10 million views, then 20. By noon, it was trending globally. In the clip, the moment Stone's voice snarled, "Filthy black scholar," ignited something raw in viewers. The brutality, the ignorance, the dignity in Samuel's silence, it all stirred the soul. Protests swelled. At Harvard, students locked arms in the plaza. At MIT and BU, professors held open lectures on racial bias in law enforcement. Even high school students walked out, holding signs that read, "He taught us, now we fight for him." The president of Harvard issued a rare personal statement. "Professor Samuel Carter is a pillar of our community. His detainment is a grave injustice. We demand his immediate release." In a quiet office above Cambridge, Daniel Avery, a civil rights attorney and former student of Samuel's, gathered every document he could find. His office floor was covered in articles, testimonies, CVs. 30 years of service," he muttered, "and they tossed him into a cage like he was nothing." He picked up his phone. "Boston Superior Court, emergency injunction." Within hours, Daniel stood on the courthouse steps, flanked by faculty and journalists. "We are filing a federal habeas corpus petition," he declared. "And if ICE does not release him voluntarily, We will expose every document, every action, every lie behind this unlawful detainment." Back in the detention center, Samuel was moved again, this time to a room with no camera, no bench, just standing walls and a flickering bulb. He leaned against the cold surface, fingers tracing the outlines of freedom songs carved into memory. "Oh, freedom, oh, freedom, oh, freedom over me." Down the hallway, a young guard stood alone. He had just seen the video. He whispered, "They arrested a professor." Another answered, "He's still in there?" The first guard stepped forward, jaw tight. "This ain't right." Meanwhile, at Channel 4 Boston, Agent Anna Lee sat down for her anonymous interview. Her voice distorted, face blurred. "I watched it happen," she said. "Agent Stone targeted him. He was told it was a suspicious person, but it was racial from the start." The reporter asked, "Why speak now?" "Because silence makes you complicit," Anna replied, "and I won't carry that weight." The leak hit like an earthquake. ICE headquarters scrambled to control the story. Emails leaked. Internal memos surfaced. At 9:47 p.m., the Boston Globe published the headline, "Harvard Professor Wrongfully Detained. Icy Source Confirms Racial Profiling." In detention, the guards didn't say much, but when one handed Samuel a sealed envelope through the bars, he met Samuel's eyes for the first time. "It's happening," the guard whispered. "They know." Samuel opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside, a photocopy of the front page. His name, his photo, his truth, no longer buried. He smiled, slow and tired, but real. For the first time in 3 days, he whispered to himself, "They see me." The world had seen the cuffs. Now it demanded they be removed. Inside a packed courtroom at the John Joseph Moakley Courthouse, tension buzzed like a wire ready to snap. Civil rights attorney Daniel Avery stood firm before the bench, his voice steady but urgent. "Your Honor, we present irrefutable evidence. Academic credentials, letters from Harvard, and testimony from federal agents, proving Professor Samuel Carter's legal status and reputation. His detainment is unlawful. He must be released immediately." The judge, a black woman with gray curls and piercing eyes, tapped her pen once before speaking. "IC has 3 hours to provide justification or release. Until then, Mr. Carter remains in their custody, but I expect full cooperation." Outside, the plaza swelled with protesters. Students in graduation robes, professors in suits, nurses, janitors, pastors, all chanting one name. "Carter! Carter! Carter!" Reporters flooded the sidewalk. Sarah Miles stood just behind a row of cameras clutching a copy of Samuel's syllabus. His notes were scribbled in the margins, still stained with blood. "He taught us history so we wouldn't repeat it," she told a CNN mic. "Now they're writing it on his back." At the detention center, the atmosphere had shifted. Guards no longer looked Samuel in the eye. One quietly loosened his handcuffs without a word. Another slid him a fresh shirt, no orange, civilian clothes. Then came the knock. The door opened slowly. Anna Lee stood there, face taut with regret. "Professor Carter," she said softly, "you're being transferred under court order." Samuel stood without flinching. His eyes met hers. "You chose to speak," he said. "I had to," she replied. "I couldn't breathe under it anymore." They walked past the cells in silence. Detainees pressed against the glass, some cheering, others simply nodding. They knew. They all knew. Outside the gates, the moment the doors swung open, a wave of sound hit them like thunder. Applause, cheers, chants of freedom. Samuel squinted against the flash of cameras but never slowed his stride. Daniel Avery stepped forward with arms open. "It's over," he said. "You're free." "No," Samuel replied, voice hoarse but unwavering. "It's only just begun." The judge's ruling would be formalized within the hour. IC had folded under pressure. Media firestorm, legal challenge, internal leaks. But the wound they opened bled into every institution. Across the city, muralists began painting Samuel's image on brick walls, his eyes calm, his cuffs broken. That evening, Harvard prepared for his return. The university president personally requested Samuel speak at Memorial Hall. Staff set out every chair they had. Still, students sat on steps, in aisles, shoulder to shoulder. When Samuel walked in, the entire room rose. He stood at the podium, still marked by days in custody. But his voice filled the chamber. "I stood in silence because they wanted to erase me, but you made sure the world heard anyway." Applause surged. "This fight is not just mine," he continued. "It's every person labeled a threat for daring to sit in a park, for daring to learn, for daring to breathe." He paused, looked to the back where Anna Lee stood alone. "To those who broke ranks, to do what's right, thank you." Then he raised his hand slowly. The room quieted. "Knowledge is power," he said, "and justice is its foundation. Build wisely." The crowd rose again, louder this time. Cameras flashed, tears flowed. Outside, Boston Common glowed under golden lamplight, but something brighter had been lit. Samuel's release sent shockwaves across the nation, but for one ICE agent, it cracked something deeper, her silence. Agent Anna Lee hadn't slept. Not really. The cheers from the crowd still echoed in her head, but so did Stone's voice, his slur, the cuffs, the look on Samuel's face. She sat in her kitchen, blinds drawn, laptop open. Her cursor blinked on an encrypted message to WBZ-TV. She hit send. Minutes later, the phone rang. "This is WBZ," the voice said. "We received your email. Are you willing to go on record?" "I'll speak," she said, steadying her breath. "But distort my face. Change my voice. I still work there, for now." That afternoon, the leak broke every channel. ICE agent reveals racial profiling in Harvard professor's arrest. On air, Anna's distorted voice filled the screen. "I was there," she said. "Stone received a call. Suspicious black male. That's all it took. He didn't ask for more. He didn't verify. He acted on bias. He escalated. And I froze." The anchor asked, "Why come forward now?" Anna hesitated. "Because it wasn't just wrong," she said, voice cracking through modulation. "It was evil dressed as protocol." The reaction was immediate. Congresswoman Elena Ruiz demanded a federal audit. Civil rights lawyers flooded ICE with FOIA requests. The ACLU launched a campaign. Shahat, Carter was right. Inside the ICE regional office, chaos erupted. Michael Stone stormed into the supervisor's office, slamming a memo on the desk. "This is a witch hunt," he shouted. But the supervisor was already on the phone with DC. "Mike, you're done," he said coldly. "Hand over your badge." Stone froze. He glanced at the office window, staff peering out, whispers already flying. Downstairs, Anna walked through security with her head up. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. That night, Samuel sat in his study, the familiar scent of books and leather-bound memories grounding him. He scrolled through the news, eyes landing on Anna's shadowed silhouette. He whispered, "You spoke." His phone buzzed. "Sarah." "They just aired the leak. The world knows." He didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said, "It's not enough to free me. We free the truth, too." He opened his journal and wrote, "Justice is never loud, but it echoes where silence used to live." At a town hall on the Harvard campus, students and faculty filled every seat. Cameras streamed live. A panel of activists, educators, and community leaders discussed systemic reform. Daniel Avery took the mic. "We don't just sue," he said. "We shift. We train. We reform. The system doesn't need a Band-Aid. It needs surgery." Then Samuel was introduced. He stood at the podium again, this time beside Anna. "She risked everything to break the silence," he said. "We honor truth when it costs something." The crowd rose to their feet, thunderous and unwavering. Anna didn't cry, but her hands shook at her sides. Afterward, a student approached her. "Thanks," she said softly, "for being brave." Anna looked at her. It was overdue. Outside, a reporter asked Samuel, "What's next?" He looked out over the city, dusk settling like quiet resolve. "We keep walking," he said, "until no one is mistaken for a threat just because they sat in the sun." The leak had detonated across the country. The courts had ruled. And now, after 73 hours of darkness, Samuel Carter was finally coming home. The gates of the detention center swung open beneath a haze of flashing lights and roaring chants. Samuel emerged, shoulders squared, wrists still bandaged, head held high. The crowd erupted. From college students to clergy, from journalists to janitors, they packed Boston Common like it was sacred ground. The same park where he had been stolen now became the place of his return. Sarah was at the front, tears streaking her cheeks, clutching the same book Samuel was reading when they dragged him away. She pushed through the press line and rushed into his arms. "You never stopped teaching us," she whispered. He nodded, eyes glistening. Daniel Avery approached next, placing a hand over Samuel's shoulder. "We won this round, but they're still watching." "I hope they are," Samuel said. "They need to learn." The procession moved slowly toward Harvard Yard. People sang. Drums thumped. Flags waved. American and Pan-African alike. Every footstep carried a weight Boston hadn't felt in decades. Inside Memorial Hall, the crowd waited. Cameras lined the balcony. CNN, MSNBC, PBS, all live. When Samuel took the podium, the applause didn't stop for nearly 2 minutes. He stood silently, absorbing it, like a man inhaling sunlight after too long underground. Then, gently, he raised his hand. The room fell still. "I was caged for reading," he said. "Not because they feared what I'd done, but because they feared what I might say." He scanned the faces before him. Students, professors, police officers, children on parents' laps. 3 days in a cell, cold meals, no clock, no mirror, just silence and steel. And still, I was freer than they were, because I remembered who I was. Applause thundered, but he raised his voice. "They cuffed me like a criminal, but I walked out like a teacher, like a man, like your neighbor, like your future." He paused again, letting the truth settle in the room like dust in sunlight. "I won't ask you to forget what they did. I'll ask you to remember why. They did it, because I existed where they didn't expect me. With a book, with a lesson, with dignity." The crowd rose again, but Samuel wasn't done. "To those watching from home, those hiding behind policy or silence, hear this. You cannot erase justice. You can only delay it." And its clock just started ticking. In the front row, Anna Lee sat still, eyes glassy, hands in her lap. Samuel met her gaze. "I was not alone in that place. Too many sit behind bars because someone judged their skin before their soul. So we rise now, not just for me, but for all of them." He stepped back from the podium. One by one, the crowd stood. Then someone chanted from the back, "Justice, Carter." It rippled forward. "Justice, Carter." Students picked it up. Professors, journalists. Soon the chant became a roar. Outside on the steps of Harvard, the sun dipped behind the clouds, but the fire it left behind burned in every eye. The cheers had faded, the podium emptied, but Samuel Carter sat awake, pen in hand, heart heavy, truth still burning. The weight of 3 days behind bars wasn't just physical. It settled in the bones, echoing in the quiet moments. Not because of fear, but because of the faces he couldn't forget. Men in cells who'd been there for months, some undocumented, some wrongly profiled, Some just poor and forgotten. He had walked out to applause. They didn't. Now, in his Harvard office, light from the desk lamp glinting off the cuff-shaped bruises on his wrists, Samuel flipped through the names he'd memorized. He hadn't asked for them, but they gave them anyway. Luis, Bakari, Peter, Aman. He whispered, "I said I'd remember you." Across campus, Daniel Avery sat with a team of law students stacking files 6 inches high. "We have ICE records," he said. "Thousands of cases. This is the moment. We move now." One student asked, "How far do we push?" Daniel didn't blink. "All the way to Congress if we have to." That same night, Samuel met with Harvard leadership. "I don't just want a memorial," he said. "I want a movement." The university president leaned forward. "What are you proposing?" "A center for justice," Samuel said, voice low but sure. "For research, for legal aid, for education, named after the detained, not me." After a pause, the president nodded. "We'll fund it." "And it'll be public," Samuel added, "because injustice doesn't hide in textbooks, it hides in policies." The next morning, he returned to Boston Common, not with cameras or crowds, but with a folding chair and a notepad. He sat in the exact spot where the arrest began. One by one, people approached. Some offered quiet nods. Others whispered, "Thank you." A woman in a headscarf asked, "Why come back here?" Samuel looked up at the trees, the same green that danced above him days ago. "Because this," he said, "is where the silence broke." Nearby, Sarah and other students were organizing their next protest, this time for a Guatemalan father still detained at the same facility. "It's bigger than Professor Carter now," she told a reporter. "He lit the fire, but we're carrying the torch." Later that week, Samuel testified before the Massachusetts State Senate. The room was packed, the air thick with flashbulbs and folded arms. "I wasn't the first," he said, "but I refuse to be another name lost in the churn." He held up the shackled wrist again. "This is not just a scar," he said. "It's a reminder of every freedom we take for granted, and everyone we have to fight for." Lawmakers leaned in. Some nodded, others avoided his gaze, but no one could ignore the shift happening in the room. By the end of the session, a motion was filed to review local cooperation with ICE. It passed committee within a day. Samuel returned to Harvard that evening to find his students had taken over his office, with flyers, banners, petitions. He laughed. "Looks like I've been overthrown." Sarah handed him a mug. "You started a revolution." He sipped slowly. "No," he said. "I just remembered how to resist." The hearings began under gray skies, but inside the Boston courtroom, the tension cracked like thunder. For the first time since that June afternoon, Michael Stone sat facing the consequences. Samuel entered quietly, dressed in a navy suit, walking with slow precision. The same man they once dragged away in cuffs now stood tall, flanked by attorneys, professors, and students. Reporters lined the benches. Outside, a crowd gathered again, holding signs, chanting, waiting. "Justice for Carter! End racial profiling!" Stone looked thinner than before. Less rage, more calculation. But he still wore arrogance like armor. The judge reviewed the charges. Civil suit for unlawful detainment, violation of constitutional rights, and emotional distress. Samuel took the stand first. "Tell us what happened," his lawyer prompted. Samuel didn't blink. "I was sitting, reading, preparing to teach about justice. They made me a suspect because of my skin." He paused, voice even. "Agent Stone called me a fraud, called me filthy. When I said I taught at Harvard, he laughed." The courtroom was silent. Stone's attorney objected. Emotional conjecture. But the judge overruled. "Let him speak." Samuel continued. "He hit me. He cuffed me until I bled. I wasn't resisting. I was existing." He showed the scars. Faint now, but still present. Symbols of pain branded in silence. Next came Anna Lee. "I was there," she said softly. "I saw the fear in Stone's eyes. not of danger, but of defiance. He wasn't protecting law. He was enforcing bias. Stone scowled, but said nothing. The prosecution presented ICE records, dozens of Stone's detainments, disproportionately targeting black and brown men, patterns too loud to ignore. Then the leak played on the screen, Anna's distorted voice from weeks earlier. "I can't stay silent." It echoed across the courtroom, and Stone's head dropped. By day's end, the judge ruled. Stone's actions were unlawful. A federal civil rights investigation would proceed. Applause broke out. Not allowed, but no one stopped it. As Stone was led out, a camera caught his eyes flicking up toward Samuel. Samuel didn't gloat. He nodded. Quiet. Steady. Like a man who had already won something deeper. That night, ICE released a statement. Agent Michael Stone has been officially terminated. A full internal review is underway. CNN ran a special report titled From Chains to Change, the Samuel Carter Story. At Harvard, students painted a mural on the campus wall. It showed Samuel seated under the same tree in Boston Common, a book in his hands with the words, "Knowledge is power, justice is its foundation." Sarah added the finishing touch, silver handcuffs cracked open at the base. Later, Samuel visited the detention center once more, this time as a part of a legal inspection team. He walked past the same cells, saw the same flickering lights, heard the same voices he once shared silence with. "I'm not here as a visitor," he told the staff. "I'm here as oversight." In a corner cell, Luis stood up. "You came back," he whispered. Samuel nodded. "I said I would." A week after the court's decision, Boston Common breathed with a different kind of silence. The crowd gathered slowly, shoulders touching, banners fluttering. Students, lawyers, activists, and elders stood beneath the trees, eyes fixed on a bronze plaque cloaked in cloth near the same bench where it all began. Samuel stood beside it, quiet in a gray overcoat, the autumn wind pressing against his frame. Sarah stood next to him, holding a folded flag marked with Harvard crimson. The mayor stepped forward, voice echoing through the mic. "Today, we honor not just a man, but a moment that shook the conscience of this city." Professor Carter didn't ask to be a symbol, but he became one. The cloth dropped. On the plaque, etched in steel, here stood Professor Samuel Carter. He carried knowledge. They brought chains. He chose truth. We chose justice. Beneath it, taught justice. Samuel stepped to the mic. No notes, just presence. "I sat on that bench reading about freedom," he said slowly, "and I was reminded that even knowledge isn't always a shield." He paused. "But it can be a sword." Cheers rippled through the trees. He continued, voice firm. "This plaque doesn't belong to me. It belongs to every person who's ever been silenced, profiled, detained, or discarded." He glanced to the edge of the crowd, where Luis, Bakari, and Aman stood watching, nodding quietly. "Truth doesn't bend for protocol. It breaks it," Samuel said. "It exposes what shouldn't be hidden, and once seen, it demands action." He raised his hand, revealing his wrist. The scar had faded, but not vanished. "This," he said, "was meant to shame me. Instead, it marked the beginning of a movement." Later that day, he returned to Harvard, walking into the newly launched Justice and Equity Research Center, funded by alumni, public donations, and faculty grants. The entryway bore a quote in thick black letters, "Never stay silent. SC." Inside, students were already drafting proposals, tracking ICE detentions, preparing civil suits. Samuel passed Sarah, who grinned. "You did it," she whispered. He shook his head. "No," he said, "we did." Across the country, more universities pledged to open centers of their own. Civic coalitions sprouted in Atlanta, Chicago, Oakland. And in Washington, ICE leadership was called to testify before Congress, grilled about racial profiling, lack of accountability, and Stone's legacy. The system had felt untouchable, but now it felt watched. And everywhere Samuel spoke, at schools, churches, town halls, he ended the same way. I was one, but we are many, and we are not afraid to read, to speak, to rise. If this story moved you, share it. Let the world see what justice looks like when truth refuses to stay silent. Comment #justice if you believe it's time for change. Where are you watching from? Drop your city below. The bright, humming lights of Houston Community Hospital, a quiet storm was about to break loose. Dr. Marcus Lee wasn't just any man in a white coat. He was the calm in the chaos. The surgeon who'd stitched together the hearts of thousands, literally and metaphorically. At 48, his steady hands had saved lives across race, class, and creed. But none of that mattered today. Because today, someone made a call. A suspicious person was walking through the ER, not because he threatened anyone, not because he acted out, but because he was black, tall, silent, focused, wearing a stethoscope and dignity. When ICE agents stormed in, badges flashing, hands already reaching for cuffs, Marcus didn't flinch. He was mid-sentence with a patient explaining a recovery plan. That's when Agent John Carter barked, "Papers, now." Not, "Excuse me, doctor." Not, "May we ask a few questions?" Just suspicion, just power, just race. And when Marcus calmly said, "I'm a citizen. This is my hospital," Carter's response sliced through the room. "Citizen? You don't look it." What followed wasn't just an arrest. It was a stripping of honor. A man cuffed in front of his patients, blood dripping from his wrists, slurs hurled like scalpels, and all while cameras rolled. But here's what Carter didn't know. Dr. Marcus Lee had more than scalpel skills. He had a community behind him, credentials with national recognition, and a friend who knew how to shake the legal pillars of injustice. Can one man's silence in a cell become a roar loud enough to force an entire system to apologize? If this makes your blood boil, share it, because silence is what they count on. And tell us, where are you watching from? Comment #justice and let the world know we see what they do. Houston's emergency room echoed with beeping monitors and the shuffle of rushed steps. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Dr. Marcus Lee leaned over a young woman clutching her abdomen, pain etched deep into her face. With calm precision, he adjusted her IV, his white coat catching the sterile light like a beacon. His voice was low, steady. "You're going to be okay. I'm here." At 48, Dr. Lee carried more than a stethoscope. He carried legacy. 25 years of medicine. Thousands of lives touched. A calm warrior in chaos. Around him, the staff moved with practiced rhythm, a symphony of care. Yet, something foreign buzzed underneath today, an unease that made the hairs on his arms rise. Behind the front desk, a young receptionist whispered into a phone, eyes darting toward Marcus with confusion, or was it fear? She muttered, "Yes, he's still here. Tall, black, acting odd, I think." Acting odd? Marcus didn't hear the words. He was focused on charting notes, glancing up only when a pair of boots echoed across the tile floor. Then came another, and another. 4 agents in ice jackets pushed through the ER doors with hard eyes and rigid posture. The lead, Agent John Carter, white, mid-40s, stepped forward like he owned the air around him. His voice sliced through the ward. "Hey, you there! Papers, now!" The room froze. Nurse Sarah, chart in hand, blinked in disbelief. "He's a doctor," she whispered. Marcus turned, eyes calm but alert. "Excuse me?" Carter's lip curled. "I said ID. Let's go." Marcus reached for the badge clipped to his coat. "Dr. Marcus Lee, U.S. citizen, surgeon at this hospital." "Citizen?" Carter scoffed. "You don't look it." The words dropped like a grenade. Sarah stepped forward, her voice trembling. He's been here for years. He just finished surgery." Carter didn't care. His team flanked Marcus like wolves closing in. "You match a description. Dark male, suspicious." Marcus exhaled slowly, the weight of years pressing on his shoulders. He'd heard variations of this line before, but never here, never in his own hospital. "I'm with a patient," he said. "You're with me now," Carter snapped. Marcus stood straight, towering. "You have no right," but Carter was already moving. A hand shoved his shoulder, a second yanked his wrist. Metal cuffs bit into skin. A gasp rippled through the ER. Blood dripped from Marcus's hand, running down his wrist like a silent scream. "Stop! You can't do that!" Sarah shouted, pulling out her phone. "Put that away!" one agent barked. She didn't. Behind them, patients gawked. A child started crying. A security guard stood frozen. Marcus didn't struggle. He stared at Carter, face steady. "You're making a mistake." Carter leaned in, hissed, "You're not above the law, doctor." His voice laced with venom. But behind Marcus's silence was a storm brewing, because they had just cuffed the wrong man. And Houston was about to find out. What happens when a healer becomes the accused? Can truth break through power? Don't scroll. Stay with us. Marcus Lee had been dragged from his ER like a criminal, handcuffed and humiliated. But before the chaos, before the cuffs, he was something else entirely. A healer whose reputation stretched across Texas. He walked the hospital halls like a lighthouse through fog. Tall, reserved, with graying temples and eyes that had seen both miracles and grief. Marcus never chased applause. He chased heartbeats. That was enough. 25 years ago, he'd started as an intern with barely enough money for gas. Now, his name graced the top of the hospital's surgical board. His peers called him the anchor, the one who steadied the storm, not because he bragged, but because he showed up. Every time. He always told new nurses, patients come first, always, before paperwork, before ego, before protocol. And he lived it. Back in April, a young boy named Jameer had arrived coding after a bike accident. The ER was short-staffed, no trauma team available. Marcus was just finishing a triple bypass when he heard the commotion. He didn't hesitate, removed his gloves, scrubbed again, and joined the pediatric team mid-crash. Jameer survived. His mother still brought cookies every Friday. Those stories echoed through the hospital, whispered between floors. But Marcus never paused to hear them. He moved room to room, head down, heart open. One of his favorite patients, Mrs. Thompson, a retired librarian, called him her angel in a white coat. When he stopped by her recovery room the morning of the ice incident, she took his hand and whispered, "We don't deserve you, Dr. Lee, but we need you." He smiled, grateful, but something in his chest was tight. A tension had been building. A week earlier, a patient's family had questioned whether he was qualified. Said it out loud. "You sure he's the surgeon? Thought he was maintenance." It wasn't the first time. Probably wouldn't be the last. He'd brushed it off. But this morning, the air in the hospital felt thin. He stood in the staff lounge sipping stale coffee, flipping through updates on community health programs. An article titled "Healthcare Deserts in Black Communities" caught his eye. He didn't know that, one floor below, a receptionist was watching him. Watching with narrowed eyes. She'd only been hired 3 weeks ago. New to Houston. Grew up in suburban Nebraska. Something about Marcus's calm rattled her. A black man with authority unnerved her, though she didn't have the language to admit it. She told herself he was too quiet. Too intense. So she picked up the phone and made a call. Marcus walked into exam room 6, checking on a young athlete recovering from knee surgery. As he adjusted the bandage, he didn't hear the boots echoing closer. Didn't see Carter's badge, didn't feel the eyes burning into his back. But everything was about to shift. And when a storm hits a sanctuary, who's left standing in the rubble? When words fail and fists rise, will truth still have a voice? Stay with us. Dr. Marcus Lee had become a symbol of hope for the hospital, but that morning something inside him shifted. He walked into room 312, the scent of disinfectant thick in the air, and found Mrs. Thompson sitting up with a blanket over her knees. She smiled the moment she saw him, her skin pale, but her eyes sharp. "Morning, Angel," she said, her voice gravelly but warm. Marcus chuckled softly, resting his hand on hers. "How's your heart feeling today?" She squeezed his fingers, then whispered, "It's still beating, because of you." That moment, quiet, human, deeply personal, was why Marcus stayed in medicine. He didn't crave titles. He needed connection. He'd grown up watching his mother work double shifts as a nursing aide, sleeping on buses between jobs. She always told him, "Do work that heals." He checked her vitals, reviewed her recovery plan, and gave her a soft pat on the arm before leaving the room. But as he walked down the hallway, something prickled beneath his skin, a strange tension, like a note held too long in a song. He passed by the front desk and caught a whisper. "He's still here," someone said behind cupped hands. He didn't stop, just kept walking, the words echoing in his head like a warning bell. Back in his office, he sat in silence. The walls were lined with awards, certificates from Harvard Medical, plaques from the city council, framed articles praising his free clinic work. But today they felt hollow. He opened a drawer and pulled out a photograph. His son, David, 6 years old, wearing a toy stethoscope and grinning wide. Marcus traced the edges of the photo, jaw tightening. He'd taught David about dignity, about showing up even when the world told you not to. But what did dignity mean when suspicion could still walk through a hospital's front door and call itself authority? The intercom crackled. "Dr. Lee, to ER Bay 2. He slipped the photo back into the drawer and stood. Straightened his coat. The ER doors hissed open, and the chaos met him like heat from a fire. A young boy with a gash above his eye cried in a corner. Nurses rushed past with IV bags. A man clutched his chest near triage. Marcus moved like a current through it all, calm and focused. But then the doors slammed again. 4 ICE agents burst into the ER. The crowd paused, a beat of confusion washing through the room like a sudden hush in church. Marcus blinked. The lead agent, square-jawed, with eyes like cracked glass, stepped forward. "Dr. Lee," a nurse warned behind him. Marcus turned fully, stethoscope still around his neck. He didn't know it yet, but the next 90 seconds would tear apart everything he had built. Because when justice wears boots instead of balance, who defends the defenders? Keep watching. The storm hasn't even begun. The tension that had been building finally cracked the surface. Dr. Marcus Lee turned from a patient discharge note to see a wall of ICE agents entering the ER like a storm without warning. Agent John Carter stood in front, his badge displayed more like a weapon than identification. He had the air of someone who'd never been told no, and didn't plan to start now. "Papers, now!" Carter barked. The ER froze. Marcus blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said show me identification. Passport, visa, whatever you've got." Marcus stood tall, calm, but not silent. "I'm a U.S. citizen, born and raised. I'm also a doctor. I work here." Carter's lip twitched with a sneer. "Citizen? You don't look it." Those 5 words hit like a slap. Every nurse, every tech in the room went still. Nurse Sarah, still holding a clipboard, stepped forward. "He's Dr. Lee. This is his hospital. What is this?" Carter didn't answer her. He stared at Marcus with narrowed eyes, pulling something from his jacket. A small photo. A printed-out, grainy image from a traffic cam. The figure in the image was black, yes, but blurry, faceless. Marcus glanced at it, then back to Carter. "That's not me." "Convenient," Carter muttered. "We've had a report about a suspicious male matching your description, and you're not exactly blending in." "I'm wearing scrubs and a badge in my own workplace," Marcus said, voice like steel wrapped in silk. Carter stepped closer, chest puffed. Got a record? Marcus didn't flinch. Only one that matters is my surgical record. You can ask any patient here. Carter turned to his agents. Detain him. You can't do that, Sarah protested, panic rising in her voice. I can, and I will. Carter snapped. Marcus held up his hands. I've done nothing wrong. You're violating my rights. Carter growled. Don't start preaching, quack. You think a coat makes you special? Without warning, Carter swung a fist, aimed at Marcus's face. Marcus dodged, barely, reflexes still sharp from years in high-stakes trauma rooms. Gasps rippled through the ER. Hey! A male nurse shouted. Carter didn't care. He pointed at Marcus. Cuff him, now! One of the agents hesitated, looking toward Agent Lisa Wong, the youngest of the team. Her hand hovered near her holster, her eyes wide with hesitation. But she didn't move. The other agent grabbed Marcus's arms. You're making a serious mistake, Marcus said, low but steady. Carter didn't even blink. Yeah? We'll see who made the mistake when we check your prints. Behind him, the ER had turned into a silent witness. Patients watched from gurneys. A mother covered her son's eyes. Sarah fumbled for her phone, already recording. Marcus didn't resist. His gaze was steady even as metal clamped around his wrists. But the pain didn't come from the cuffs. It came from the silence, from the look in his co-worker's eyes, from knowing that even here, in the place he'd saved lives, he wasn't safe. And as blood welled beneath the cuffs, the truth had only begun to bleed out. Don't blink. The system just showed its face. Blood still fresh at his wrist, Marcus stood cuffed in his own emergency room. The clinking metal echoed louder than the heart monitors around him. He didn't drop his gaze, not when Carter called him a liar, not when the patient stared, stunned and silent. I said shut it, black quack! Carter barked, stepping forward. I'm a licensed surgeon, Marcus replied, his voice low but unwavering. You can verify my record, right now. But Carter didn't want records. He wanted a scene. You think a diploma protects you? That coat don't mean squat to me, Carter snarled, before nodding to his agents. Take him outside. Let him explain in custody. Marcus's hands were pulled tighter behind his back. The cuffs sliced deeper. Every step toward the exit scraped away another layer of dignity. But he walked with his spine straight, shoulders squared. Patients gasped. Some looked away. One young boy asked, Mom, is that a bad guy? No, baby, she whispered, trembling. That's a good man. Nurse Sarah was done watching. She stepped between Marcus and the double doors, pulling out her phone. You're assaulting a doctor, she said, her voice shaking but fierce. And I'm filming everything. Carter rolled his eyes. Put that down. She didn't. Behind her, Agent Lisa Wong stood frozen. Her gloved hands trembled at her side. Lisa, Carter barked, get control of your partner. Lisa didn't move. Her eyes flicked between Carter's sneer and Marcus's bleeding wrists. She looked like she wanted to say something, but fear locked her jaw shut. Marcus turned his head slightly. You don't have to be part of this, he told her calmly. Not today. The room fell silent again. Carter stepped forward and shoved Marcus hard into the wall. A sickening thud echoed as the side of Marcus's face hit the tile. Blood from his mouth smeared across the white coat that had once stood for something sacred. Sarah screamed, Stop it! He's a top doctor, you're hurting him! Wong finally spoke. John, that's enough. Carter turned to her, fury flashing. You're not in command here. But his words fell flat, because behind him, every nurse had stopped working. Phones were out, cameras were on. The chaos of the ER slowed. Time hung heavy. Marcus didn't groan, didn't beg. He looked straight ahead as Carter yanked him upright again. I'm going to file a complaint, Sarah shouted. With Internal Affairs, with the State Medical Board, with the media. Carter didn't flinch. You'll be ignored, just like him. But even as he said it, doubt flickered in his eyes. Because something had shifted. And the silence wasn't submission. It was fuel. Outside those hospital doors, justice wasn't waiting. But something else was. Truth, recording, and a public ready to rise. Keep watching. The system just picked the wrong man to humiliate. Marcus's head throbbed from the impact, blood trailing from his temple, but his spirit held firm. They tried to drag him like a man stripped of worth, but they couldn't touch what he carried inside. Outside the ER, the summer air was thick with heat and disbelief. The concrete beneath his feet burned through his soles. But still, he stood straight, even as the cuffs dug deeper into his wrists. Carter wasn't finished humiliating him. "Tell me again," he growled in Marcus's ear. "What kind of doctor you said you were?" Marcus turned his head, eyes locked. "Cardiothoracic. I open hearts for a living. Yours must be missing." Carter slapped him across the face. The crack echoed down the sidewalk. Lisa Wong flinched visibly behind him, her lips trembling. Her hand hovered again near her belt, but she said nothing, did nothing. Inside the hospital windows, faces pressed to the glass. Sarah was still filming from the main entrance, her voice cracking through her phone. "They're beating him. They're beating Dr. Lee." "Get in the van," Carter snapped, yanking the door open. Marcus stepped up on his own, refusing to be shoved. The metal scraped again, sharper now. Blood trickled down his fingers, warm and steady. "Shut it, black quack," Carter spat one last time, slamming the door behind him. Back inside, Sarah turned to the crowd that had gathered around the reception desk. Nurses, orderlies, even patients. "We're not letting this happen," she said. "Not again. Not here." Someone murmured, "He saved my daughter." Another added, "He's the only reason my father's still breathing." And then, "I'm calling the Chronicle." Down the hall, Lisa stood frozen beside the ice vehicle. She watched Marcus through the tinted glass, his jaw set, the blood still dripping silently down his forearm. Her conscience screamed louder than Carter ever had. "Why didn't you stop him?" she whispered to herself. Inside the van, Marcus closed his eyes, focusing on his breath. Inhale, exhale. He remembered the first time he'd stood in an operating room alone, afraid of losing his patient. He remembered his residency director's voice. "You stay steady, you stay honest, you stay standing, even when it shakes." And now he would. Because this wasn't just about him. This was about every black professional forced to prove they belonged. Every boy told to speak softer. Every girl taught to keep her hands visible. He opened his eyes, and from behind the bars, the truth began to blaze. The system had shackled his wrists, but not his resolve. And now the world was watching. "Stay with us. The fire has only just been lit." Marcus was dragged through the metal doors of the Houston Detention Center. The heat of the sun traded for stale air that reeked of bleach, sweat, and despair. The cuffs had cut so deep they left a smear of blood along his palms. Still, he didn't wince. He counted his breaths. Inhale, exhale. "This way," a guard grunted, not bothering to look him in the eye. They shoved him into a holding cell no bigger than a supply closet. 3 bunks, 1 flickering light, 1 broken toilet. The walls were stained yellow from age and neglect. The door slammed behind him. Across the room sat 2 other men, eyes sunken, faces silent. One nodded once. The other didn't move. Marcus sat on the edge of the cold metal bunk, shoulders straight. The silence wrapped around him like a weighted blanket. His white coat had been stripped at booking. So had his phone, his ID, his dignity. All that was left were the bruises on his wrists and the ringing silence in his ears. Hours passed. No food, no lawyer, no phone call. He closed his eyes, retreating inward. And there, in the silence, were his patients. Jameer, the boy from the bike accident. Mrs. Thompson and her healing heart. The man who held his hand in the ICU whispering, "Don't let me die." Each memory stitched him back together. "I'm not breaking." he whispered to himself. "You don't get to take that." From the hallway, he heard footsteps, then yelling. A woman's voice, Agent Wong, arguing. "He's a doctor! We can't just bury this!" "Watch your tone," came Carter's growl. Marcus's jaw clenched. He knew the type. Men who mistook authority for righteousness. The hours dragged on. The walls pressed in. At one point, a man 2 cells over began to weep. Loud, aching sobs that wouldn't stop. Marcus stood and knocked gently on the wall. "Hey, I hear you." The crying slowed. Just a little. In that cell, stripped of everything he built, Marcus did what he always had. He cared. Even in chains. Even in silence. That night, he sat on the hard mattress, back against the wall. Blood still crusted along his arm. No blanket, no apology, but his spirit, unbroken. Because while they locked away his body, the truth was already moving, and it would not be contained. Justice was late, but it was coming, and it had his name on it. The silence inside Marcus's cell was broken by the sound of a phone notification from outside the steel door, then another, and another. Across Houston, the video Sarah filmed was catching fire. It was only 27 seconds. A shaky clip. Carter slapping a cuffed black man in a bloodied coat. A voice screaming, "He's a doctor!" And Marcus's calm, defiant face. Lips tight, blood trickling, but unbroken. By morning, it had 4 million views. The hospital lobby transformed. Doctors in scrubs stood shoulder to shoulder with nurses, janitors, med students. They chanted one name. "Dr. Lee! Dr. Lee! Dr. Lee!" Sarah stood at the front, phone still in hand, voice hoarse from interviews. CNN, MSNBC, local radio. "He's our best surgeon," she told anyone who'd listen. "He's the reason people live here." The hospital CEO tried to calm things down. "Let's not rush to conclusions." But the staff wasn't asking anymore. They were demanding. In nearby clinics, patients refused care in protest. Not until Dr. Lee is free. The Texas Medical Board issued a statement. "We stand with Dr. Marcus Lee." By noon, it reached Capitol Hill. Senator Grace Nolan tweeted, "What happened to Dr. Marcus Lee is more than injustice. It's an indictment of our system. Free Lee." Back in the detention center, Marcus sat in the same position, unaware. No TV, no phone, no word. But the guards were different now. Less smirking, more silent. And then one whispered, "They're talking about you, Doc." Marcus looked up slowly. The guard glanced around, then slipped a folded paper through the bars. Printed headlines from the Chronicle. Black Doctor. Wrongly detained. Video ignites national outrage. Marcus stared at the page. A photo of him, eyes swollen, lips bloodied, standing cuffed in the hospital he helped build. His throat tightened, but not with shame. It was something deeper. Not pride, not anger, a promise. Across the city, people gathered at the ICE field office. Chants rose louder, hashtags flooded. A petition gained 500,000 signatures in 24 hours. By evening, even the mayor weighed in. "Dr. Lee's treatment is unacceptable. We demand answers." Inside that tiny cell, Marcus stood. And for the first time since they'd shackled him, he smiled. Not because it was over, but because it had begun. The system tried to silence a man, but instead, they gave him a microphone. His name becomes a rallying cry. And the truth, undeniable. The protest outside ICE headquarters grew louder with every passing hour. Marcus's name was now printed on shirts, banners, and bold headlines. But inside the detention center, he was still behind steel. His cell door creaked open before sunrise. "Lee," the guard said, avoiding eye contact. "You've got a visitor." Marcus stood slowly. His body was sore, but his presence remained steady, still wearing the bruises, still holding his dignity. He was led into a small concrete room where a plexiglass divider separated him from a tall black man in a dark blue suit. "Marcus," the man said, voice soft but urgent. Marcus froze. "Isaac?" Isaac Walker, college roommate, best man at his wedding, and now one of the most respected civil rights attorneys in Austin. "I saw the video," Isaac said. "I dropped everything. I've got your files, your licenses, your awards, you're getting out, and we're not just walking away." Marcus exhaled, the tension in his chest finally cracking. "How bad is it out there?" Isaac's lips tightened. "It's boiling. The Chronicle's printing front-page coverage. Medical associations are threatening to sue, the ACLU wants in, and the mayor just called your arrest a disgrace." Marcus leaned forward. "And Carter?" Isaac nodded grimly. "Still denying everything. IC issued a vague statement, said you were detained for questioning, but it's unraveling fast." He pulled a folder from his bag and slid it against the glass. "Here's every record proving you're a U.S. citizen, a practicing surgeon, and a man with no criminal history. I'm taking it to the federal judge myself." Marcus stared at the folder, not because he needed proof, but because it hurt that he had to prove it at all. "I'm ready," he said quietly, "not just to get out, to fight." Isaac's eyes lit up. "Then let's go to war." Outside the center, the crowd swelled into the thousands. Nurses in scrubs, patients in wheelchairs, kids holding signs. Doctors save lives, not serve time. Inside ICE headquarters, panic brewed. A second Chronicle article dropped. Marcus Lee, a doctor's life of service now stained by silence. And then the breaking point came. Lisa Wong, standing alone in front of KU Channel 11 cameras. "I was there," she said. Her voice shook, but her words landed like thunder. "Dr. Marcus Lee was not a threat. He was working. I saw Agent Carter strike him. I saw him bleed. I stayed silent. I can't anymore." The interview exploded. The headline, "ICE, Insider Breaks Rank. Alleges Racial Targeting in Doctor's Detainment." By nightfall, the Department of Justice had called for a formal investigation, and in that gray-walled holding room, Marcus looked at the door. Still locked. But the key wasn't in the guard's hands anymore. It was in the people's voices, in the ink on every article, in the trembling courage of one woman who chose truth over fear. The walls were closing in, but not on Marcus. On the system that built them. Freedom knocks. And the world waits to hear what he'll say. The truth was out, and it had a face. Lisa Wong's. Her interview on KHO TV played on every screen from downtown coffee shops to hospital waiting rooms. Her voice quivered, but her message rang clear. "I stood there while an innocent man was humiliated. I saw Agent Carter target Dr. Lee for his race. I regret my silence. I won't stay quiet anymore." The camera caught the tears she fought back, the way her hands shook as she handed over a printed report. Internal IC memos highlighting Carter's repeated use of profiling discretion. The fallout was instant. Congressional leaders called for an emergency inquiry. Protesters outside ICE offices shouted her name with the same passion they used for Marcus's. Lisa's story gave the movement a new gear. Proof. Not just injustice witnessed, injustice confessed. Inside the detention center, Marcus was told nothing, but he felt it in the air. The guards no longer barked orders. One offered him a clean towel for his hands. Another brought warm food instead of the cold tray. He knew the shift wasn't mercy. It was fear. That night, Isaac returned to the holding room, eyes lit with urgency. "You're going home," he said. "The judge signed the release." Wong's statement tipped the scales. Marcus nodded slowly. "Is Carter still working?" Isaac's face turned grim. "For now, but not for long. The DOJ has opened a full investigation, and the evidence Wong leaked, it's damning." Marcus stood, chains still at his ankles. "Then let's make it official." 20 minutes later, he stepped out of the front doors, and into history. Hundreds lined the ice building's sidewalk. They erupted into cheers, tears, and applause the moment he appeared. Signs filled the air. "We stand with Dr. Lee. Justice bleeds until we stop it." Sarah ran forward, her arms open, sobbing. "We didn't stop fighting, not for a second." Marcus hugged her tightly. "I know. You kept my heart beating." The press swarmed in. Marcus stepped onto a makeshift podium, bruises still fresh on his cheek. His voice was calm, measured, heavy with truth. "I was stripped of my coat, my name, my rights, but I never let them take my humanity. Or yours." He looked into the cameras. "Medicine knows no race. Justice should be the same." The crowd roared, but he raised a hand. "We're not done. There are others still behind bars, still misjudged, still profiled for their skin instead of seen for their soul, and I won't stop until we change that." The chains were gone, but now Marcus wore something stronger: purpose. What does a man do when freedom returns? He builds it for others. The sun beat down on Houston as Marcus Lee stepped out of ICE custody. His coat gone, his body bruised, but his presence unstoppable. The cheers from the crowd wrapped around him like armor. 3 days behind bars. 72 hours of silence, steel, and shame. But now, every voice chanting his name felt like a heartbeat returning to his chest. Cameras flashed, reporters pushed forward. But Marcus didn't flinch. He locked eyes with Sarah, standing near the front with tears streaming down her cheeks. "You're free," she whispered. He nodded once. "We all will be." He took the microphone from the city councilwoman's hands. The crowd hushed, thousands leaning in. Breath held. "I was arrested while saving lives," he began. "Dragged from an emergency room. Not for what I did, but for how I looked." His voice was calm, but each word landed like thunder. "Let me say it plain. Medicine knows no color, nor should justice." Gasps echoed. A ripple of applause swelled into a wave. But Marcus held up a hand, signaling for silence. "This isn't just about me. It's about every person who's been silenced, profiled, humiliated. I had a platform, cameras, credentials. But what about those who don't? What about the ones still locked away for looking out of place?" He looked directly into one of the cameras. "This can't end with my release. It has to begin something bigger." That night, his speech aired nationwide. It trended globally within hours. Dr. Marcus Lee, Freedom and Fire, blared across media outlets. Churches rang bells for him. High school students wore stethoscopes over their T-shirts. A mural began forming on the side of Houston Community Hospital, a brown hand holding a scalpel wrapped in chains, the links snapping in midair. Meanwhile, inside ICE headquarters, Agent Carter fumed. The building had become a fortress under scrutiny. Wong's testimony had sparked an internal investigation. Dozens of case files were being reviewed. He watched the broadcast of Marcus speaking and spat, "This isn't over." But he was wrong. It was just beginning. The next morning, Marcus returned to the hospital. No coat, no stethoscope, just himself. The lobby erupted in standing ovation. Staff lined the halls. Patients clapped from wheelchairs. The hospital CEO extended a hand. Marcus stared at it for a long moment, then shook it, firmly, silently. He walked to the ER, his ER, and paused at the double doors. There, someone had taped a note to the glass. "We kept it ready for you." Inside, his team waited. No one spoke at first. Then Sarah stepped forward and said, "Your next patient's ready." Marcus nodded. "Let's begin." Because healing wouldn't just happen in the OR anymore. It had to reach every courtroom, classroom, and corridor of power. Marcus takes the oath again, not as a doctor, but as a defender. Marcus stood before a mirror in the hospital locker room, hands steady as he tied the drawstrings of his scrubs. The bruises on his face had faded to a dull yellow, but the fire in his eyes had only grown brighter. 3 days in custody, a lifetime of change since. The hospital had welcomed him back with applause, but what came next wasn't about celebration, it was about transformation. He walked the hall slowly, absorbing every sound. The beep of monitors, the shuffling of nurses, the hushed whispers from rooms filled with hope or heartbreak. This was where his oath had always lived. But now, it had a new clause. He passed Sarah, who gave him a nod. "The city council called," she said. "They want you to speak at the town hall next week." "I'll be there," Marcus said without hesitation. "And I won't be alone." Outside the hospital, protest signs were being replaced with registration tables. Lawyers, activists, pastors, nurses, they weren't just marching anymore. They were organizing, building. Later that night, Marcus sat in his office, a stack of letters from detained immigrants in front of him, dozens of stories just like his. One read, "I'm a teacher. They thought I was a landscaper sneaking through the school lot." Another, "My son was taken from me at a stoplight. He's 15. Marcus folded his hands. "They didn't silence me. They gave me a mission." He dialed Isaac. "Let's build the coalition we talked about. Medical professionals, lawyers, advocates. No one's getting left behind again, not on my watch." Isaac chuckled. "You sound like a general now." "No," Marcus replied. "Just a doctor who's finally treating the whole disease." They created the first draft of the Justice Through Healing Act, legislation to prevent racial profiling and federal enforcement near hospitals, schools, and public service centers. By morning, Marcus was in front of a classroom of med students speaking about ethics. But he didn't use a textbook. He held up his own booking photo. "This," he said, "was taken 2 miles from here. And this is what happens when systems lose sight of humanity. So every time you treat a patient, every time you remember, you're not just healing bodies, you're protecting dignity." The students were silent. Then one raised a hand. "How do we fix what's broken?" Marcus didn't blink. "By not pretending it's fixed already." The days ahead were long, exhausting, but Marcus welcomed the fight like a second heartbeat. In detention, he'd promised he wouldn't break. Now, he vowed no one else would have to. Reform meets resistance, and the man who started it all gets a knock at his door. The Justice Through Healing Act was gaining traction, but the push for change was met with resistance from the very institution that shackled Marcus. He expected it. He welcomed it. That morning, he stood before a judge, not as a defendant but as a plaintiff. Beside him stood Isaac. On the other side of the courtroom, John Carter, eyes narrow, jaw locked. The courtroom buzzed with tension as cameras rolled and pens scratched. The clerk called the case. "Dr. Marcus Lee vs. Special Agent John Carter, IC." Carter's lawyer opened with cold professionalism. "My client followed protocol in a fluid, high-pressure situation. There was no racial bias, just a misinterpretation." Isaac rose, voice cutting. "The only thing misinterpreted was Dr. Lee's humanity." He walked to the jury. "This isn't just about a punch to the face or a man cuffed in his own workplace. It's about every layer of injustice that told Agent Carter he could get away with it, until he couldn't." The courtroom grew still. Isaac continued. "Dr. Lee didn't just suffer bruises. He lost his freedom, his dignity, and for what? A suspicion rooted not in fact, but in fear." Marcus sat silently through the proceedings, but when called to testify, he stood with poise. "I didn't need to be treated like a doctor," he said, meeting every juror's eye. "I just needed to be treated like a human being." Across the city, the case trended on every major outlet. The footage of Carter calling Marcus a black quack was played again and again. Lisa Wong's testimony echoed through the chamber like a siren of reckoning. "I knew it was wrong, and I stayed silent too long. I won't anymore." By the end of the third day, the verdict wasn't in, but the public had already delivered theirs. Carter was suspended indefinitely. His badge taken, gun removed. Icy issued a formal apology, but Marcus didn't stop there. A civil suit was filed, not just against Carter, but against the local IC branch, for failure to train, failure to supervise, and willful negligence. Justice was no longer a distant goal. It was tangible, measurable, and still unfolding. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. A young black student handed Marcus a handwritten card. "You made us feel seen." He smiled. "That's just the start." Inside his office that night, Marcus reviewed the settlement proposal, but he circled one clause: mandatory anti-bias training across IC medical liaisons. "No deal," he told Isaac. "Not unless that's permanent." Isaac nodded. "Then we hold the line." The city held its breath. Justice finds a home in stone and steel, and a name is etched that won't be erased. The courtroom doors closed behind Marcus one final time. This chapter, this war, was over, but the mission had only just begun. A month later, under a sky brushed with gold, Houston Community Hospital unveiled the plaque. Nurses gathered, med students stood shoulder to shoulder, and former patients wept openly. The plaque gleamed in the morning light. Here stood Dr. Marcus Lee, surgeon, citizen, warrior for justice. Beneath it, smaller lines carved in stone. Detained, defamed, dignified. He rose, not just for himself, but for all. As the crowd applauded, Marcus stepped forward. He touched the edge of the plaque, then turned to speak. "My name was almost erased from this building," he said, voice low but steady. "But instead, we etched something stronger." His eyes scanned the crowd. Families, reporters, government officials. "Let this wall remind us what happens when silence meets injustice and loses." Behind him, Houston lawmakers introduced the Lee Amendment, a statewide measure requiring ICE agents to obtain judicial warrants before entering hospitals or schools. It passed with bipartisan support. Marcus declined television offers. He didn't want to be a celebrity. He returned to his OR, where scalpels were sharp and seconds mattered. But his Fridays? Reserved for community forums, advocacy panels, and mentoring a new generation of medical students. Black, brown, immigrant, white, all ready to heal and defend. At one event, a teenage girl nervously approached him. "My brother's in med school because of you," she said. "He wants to fight back with knowledge." Marcus smiled. "That's the best kind of resistance." Lisa Wong stood beside him, now leading internal bias trainings across Texas. Her voice no longer trembled. As Marcus walked the halls that evening, a new nurse whispered, "Sir, I read your case in school. They said you changed policy." He chuckled softly. "I just wanted to treat a patient." And that was the truth. No revenge, no rage, just a scalpel, a mission, and a memory he refused to let rot in silence. So, if you believe justice can start in an exam room and echo through a courtroom, share this story. Tag someone who's ever been judged by how they looked, not who they were. And tell us, where are you watching from? Comment near justice if you believe one man can make the system feel its own heartbeat again. Seattle's gray morning sky, Westlake Park whispered with life. Soft shoe taps on wet brick, distant bus brakes sighing, and the shuffle of paper in a woman's hand. Amara Davis, a poised black attorney in a navy coat, sat calmly on a bench with her legal files open, unaware of the danger that had already begun circling. She wasn't just any woman. For 18 years, she had been the blade behind civil rights victories across Washington. But today, to a certain pair of eyes, none of that mattered. Across the plaza, an ICE agent with a clenched jaw and an agenda whispered by prejudice approached. His boots echoed louder than they should have. His badge glinted, not with justice, but with warning. "Papers," he demanded, like the city belonged to him. She looked up, her voice steady. "I'm a lawyer, a U.S. citizen." But that wasn't enough for Agent Cole. It was never enough. Within moments, her wrists were cuffed, tight and unrelenting. Blood darkened the cuffs. Strangers began filming. A teenager's voice cracked through the tension. "She's famous! You're making a mistake!" But the agent didn't care who she was. Not yet. Her spirit? Unbroken. Her silence? Intentional. Because what they didn't know was that this arrest, this humiliation, was about to ignite something far bigger than a single injustice. Who really was Amara Davis? And how could one woman's truth shake an entire system? If this outrages you, share it. Comment #Justice below. And let us know where you're watching from. The fight for dignity was just beginning. Westlake Park shimmered under a curtain of gray, the kind that made every corner feel uncertain. On a worn bench near the fountain, Amara Davis adjusted her reading glasses. Her fingers flipped through thick manila folders, marked with highlighters and handwritten notes. She wasn't just preparing a case, she was preparing a storm. A major lawsuit against Delcor Systems, a corporate giant accused of decades-long racial hiring discrimination. This wasn't her first high-stakes battle, but something in the air felt different. Beneath her calm surface, Amara sensed eyes. Not admiring, but scanning. Judging. Measuring. She brushed it off. 18 years of fighting injustice had taught her to sit tall even in hostile places. The murmurs began across the plaza. Behind tinted windows in a second-floor office, a man's voice muttered into a phone. "There's a suspicious woman out there, just sitting." Moments later, IC agent Stephen Cole got the call. He smirked, holstering his sidearm. "A loitering complaint? Let's go educate her." Amara was still reading when the agents arrived. They didn't announce themselves kindly. They fanned out like they were surrounding a fugitive. Agent Cole led the pack, his polished boots clicking hard against the bricks. His gaze was sharp, jaw tight with authority that dared to go unchecked. He stopped in front of her. "Papers! Now!" he barked. Amara looked up slowly. Her voice held no fear. "Excuse me?" "Identification. You're under suspicion of illegal presence." "I'm a civil rights attorney. I live here, I work here." Cole narrowed his eyes, unimpressed. "You don't look it." That one sentence sliced deeper than any accusation. Amara closed her file. "Do you treat every woman in a suit like this?" she asked, rising to her feet. "No, just the ones who think a suit erases suspicion." Around them, a few bystanders began recording on their phones, whispering. The tension grew, like static before lightning. But Amara remained steady, unblinking. "Check my credentials," she said, offering her bar card. Cole slapped it away. "You think I haven't seen fake IDs before?" "You're making a mistake," she replied firmly. Cole leaned in close, voice low. "We don't make mistakes. People like you do." Then, with a motion too fast to stop, he reached for her arm and twisted it behind her back. The snap of the cold handcuffs echoed across the park like a gunshot. Gasps broke from the crowd. A small child clutched her mother's leg. An older man shook his head in disbelief. Amara didn't resist. But she didn't bow either. Her wrists bled as the metal dug in, the cuffs too tight for even minimal movement. "You'll regret this," she whispered. Cole smirked. They all say that. But this time he had no idea who he'd just laid hands on. She wasn't just a woman with a folder. She was a warrior with an army. And the war had just begun. And somewhere, a camera lens caught every second. What will happen when the city sees who they've really cuffed? Keep watching. The cuffs still stung as Amara Davis was led away, but even in pain, her posture remained unbroken. She wasn't just another woman in the park. She was one of Seattle's fiercest voices for justice. And before this day was over, the world would remember exactly who she was. 18 years ago, Amara walked out of Howard Law with fire in her eyes and her mother's words in her heart. Don't just win, wake them up. Since then, she had carved a reputation for doing just that. She'd toppled discriminatory hiring practices at a city hospital, fought for immigrant students wrongly expelled, defended black workers targeted by facial recognition software that couldn't even recognize their humanity. Seattle knew her name. So did the Seattle Times. They once called her the Quiet Storm in Court Heels. A profile had run just last spring. Amara, seated beside stacks of case files, her afro haloed by library light. "Truth is our strongest weapon," she'd said in the interview, her voice low but firm. "Wield it fiercely, even if your hands shake." Those words had inspired dozens of young attorneys across the city, and she knew it. That's why every Thursday night she cleared her schedule for mentoring. Coffee shop tables cluttered with law school notes, her voice reminding them that justice isn't a theory, it's a war. That morning at Westlake, she'd arrived early, a folder in her lap, pages filled with depositions from black women denied promotions at Delcor Systems. Her eyes scanned every line, preparing for a courtroom showdown. But even as she read, she noticed something. The park felt off, a chill in the air, despite summer. Conversations quieted as she passed. Someone lingered too long at the coffee cart, watching. Amara brushed it off. Paranoia is the price of purpose, she often told herself, but something about today made her glance over her shoulder more than once. Still, she stayed. Sat on the same bench she always chose, the one with the cracked slat near the fountain. She pulled out a highlighter and got to work. That's when the teenager approached. Hoodie half-zipped, earbuds dangling, he paused, unsure. You're Amara Davis, right?" She looked up, smiling softly. "That's me." His face lit up. "You fought that case. The school one. My cousin talks about you all the time. Said you made the principal cry on the stand." Amara chuckled, the lines by her eyes deepening. "He cried because I made him read the emails he thought no one saw." "You're a hero," the teen said. "For real." She nodded, but her smile faded fast. Something in her gut turned. That tension again. "Thank you," she said. "Now get home safe, all right?" As he walked off, she folded the top page of her file, her mind slipping between the past and the now. A man once called her a firebrand in lipstick. Another said she was too polished to be angry. They never knew about the nights she couldn't sleep, the phone calls she had to make to grieving mothers, the courtroom where her voice cracked, not from nerves, but from knowing she was the only thing between her client and silence. The park buzzed on around her, but Amara didn't notice the black SUV pulling up nearby. She didn't hear the clipped steps of Agent Cole and his team. Her focus stayed locked on the affidavit in her hand, until a shadow blocked the sun. A hand dropped to a holstered weapon, and the voice said, cold as concrete, "Papers, now." She looked up slowly. Her war was about to begin again. Only this time, she was the target, and the city she fought for was about to find out just how fast injustice can come knocking. What happens when justice herself is mistaken for a threat? Keep watching. A quiet tension hung in the air after the teenager called Amara a hero. Her smile lingered only for a moment before fading, her eyes scanning the restless movement around Westlake Park. The sounds were normal, bus brakes hissing, distant laughter, but her instincts tugged. Something didn't feel right. She returned her attention to the folder on her lap, the Delcor Systems case. Pages filled with employee testimonies, time-stamped emails, HR records showing black employees passed over, their evaluations marked lacking leadership presence. Amara's fingers paused on one name, Lydia Wells. 20 years with the company. No promotion. Fired after filing a grievance. Amara's jaw tightened. She'd seen it all before. Racism dressed in suits. Discrimination buried under policy. But it never got easier. She pulled a yellow sticky note from the folder and jotted a line. Call Lydia's former supervisor. Compare promotion records by race and gender. Then she looked up. A man across the lawn, mid-40s, dark jacket, earpiece tucked under his collar, stood with his arms folded, eyes fixed on her. Amara held his gaze. He didn't flinch, just raised his hand to his mouth, whispered something, and walked behind the fountain wall. A drop of dread pooled in her stomach. A voice cut through the air. "Ms. Davis?" She turned. A middle-aged woman in a burgundy headscarf stood a few feet away. "Sorry. I don't mean to intrude. I just wanted to say, my daughter's in law school because of you." Amara blinked, caught off guard. "She saw you speak at Roosevelt High last year," the woman continued, her voice trembling. "You told those kids, even when the system tries to shut you out, carve your own way in." "My daughter wrote that on her dorm wall." Amara stood, gently placing the file inside her tote bag. "That means more than you know." The woman touched her heart, then walked off. As Amara sat again, she noticed a growing silence. The park's usual rhythm had shifted. The children near the fountain were gone. The coffee stand was closed early. She turned slowly and saw a dark SUV rolling up to the curb. 2 men stepped out. One walked straight toward her, clean-shaven, pale, stiff in movement. The second, younger, kept his hand on his hip. Behind them trailed Agent Stephen Cole. Amara's breath caught in her chest, not from fear, but from recognition. She'd seen his name before. Her firm had filed a FOIA request about a case involving racial profiling during an ICE sweep last year. Stephen Cole had been on the report. She rose to her feet as they closed in. Cole's voice cut through the distance. "Papers. Now." Her face didn't change. "I'm a citizen, a licensed attorney in this state. You match a description from a call we received. Loitering. Possible false ID." Amara's brow furrowed. "Loitering? I'm reading files on a public bench. You fit the report. Because I'm black with a briefcase?" Cole didn't answer. He stepped closer. "I'm Amara Davis. You may want to check your files again." "I said show me identification. I'm not obligated under these circumstances. Unless you're detaining me for a specific cause, I suggest—" Cole suddenly slapped the folder from her hands. Papers scattered across the concrete like fallen feathers. The noise stopped. Gasps rippled through onlookers. Amara's hands curled into fists, not in fear, but to steady the fire rising inside. "I fight injustice," she said quietly. "Not just in court. Right here." Cole leaned in, smirking. "You're not who you think you are." She didn't flinch, but in the corner of her eye she saw a teen lift a phone. Recording. Framing. Justice was watching. And so was the world. And, in that moment, Amara Davis knew. They weren't just about to test her rights. They were about to expose an entire system. The storm was coming. The crowd's whispers hadn't even settled when Agent Stephen Cole took another step forward, his voice cutting the space between them like a blade. "Papers! Now!" Amara stood tall, spine straight, hands still at her sides. She didn't raise her voice, didn't flinch. "I'm a U.S. citizen. I'm a practicing attorney in Seattle." Cole's lips curled into a sneer. "Citizen, you don't look it." That sentence dropped like a match on gasoline. The air tightened. Even the birds seemed to stop moving. Amara took a slow breath. "You're mistaken. I've done nothing wrong, and I will not comply with a request that violates my civil liberties without probable cause." Behind Cole, his backup shifted, uncomfortable. One of them, Agent Lisa Hart, looked from Amara to Cole, then back again. Her hands fidgeted by her belt, not with fear, but unease. Cole stepped closer. "So, now you're a lawyer and a philosopher?" Amara opened her bag and calmly pulled out her wallet. "You want ID? Here's my bar card. Washington State Bar, licensed since 2007. Cole snatched it without looking, tossed it to the ground. "I've seen fake IDs before," he said, voice louder now. "You think this gives you the right to sit out here and act like you own the place?" "I know exactly what it gives me," she replied. "It gives me the right to challenge your overreach, and to make sure this moment doesn't go unanswered." Around them, more phones came up. A woman whispered, "Isn't that Amara Davis?" The recognition rippled. Another man muttered, "She's the one from the Delcourt case." But Cole didn't hear, or didn't care. "You're under suspicion of false documentation and loitering. You match a report we received." "That report was based on race, nothing more." "You saying I'm racist?" Cole asked, stepping so close she could smell the coffee on his breath. "I'm saying," Amara said, voice steady as steel, "you're about to handcuff the wrong woman, and you'll find out exactly how wrong you were in court." That did it. Cole raised his arm, not to signal, but to strike. His fist swung toward her face with practiced speed, but Amara moved. She didn't step back. She didn't scream. She turned slightly, eyes locked onto his, and let his arm pass in front of her. It threw him off just enough to enrage him. "Resisting?" he snapped. "You want to play tough?" He grabbed her wrists and yanked them behind her back with force that made her gasp. The cuffs clicked, metal biting into skin. She winced, but didn't cry out. Blood began to bead at her wrist. Slowly, quietly. She turned her head toward him and said, "This is who you are when no one's watching." But someone was watching. 3 someones, then 5, then 12. Phones were up, and one of them, held by a teen in a Seahawks hoodie, was already live streaming. Agent Hart shifted forward, her voice almost a whisper. "Sir, maybe we should confirm her ID first." But Cole shoved his arm forward, pressing the cold muzzle of his gun to Amara's temple. "Shut up, black fraud," he spat. The crowd gasped. A woman shouted. The teen yelled, "She's a famous lawyer! You're assaulting a public figure!" And still, Amara didn't move. She stood, knees locked, wrists bloodied, breath controlled. Her voice, low and even, reached Hart's ears. "You don't have to be silent just because you wear the same badge." Hart's hand hovered near her own holster, not to draw, but to steady the shaking. Cole's face was red with rage, but he didn't speak again. The silence said everything, and the camera kept rolling. The world had just seen what injustice really looked like, and it wore a uniform. But this time, the whole world would answer back. And it was only getting started. Gasps still echoed in the air as Amara stood with blood trickling down her wrist, the cold steel cuffs biting into her skin. The teen's camera caught every frame, and still, Agent Cole's smirk only deepened. "You're a fraud," he barked, grabbing her shoulder and turning her toward the waiting SUV. "I fight for justice," Amara said calmly, refusing to let pain shake her voice. "Check my record. My name's public. My cases are public." "You think your little speeches matter now?" Cole hissed. "You're just another fake parading credentials that don't mean squat to federal law." His hand came up again. For a moment, it hovered like he was about to slap her. But Amara stared him down. A battle-tested stare honed from years of courtroom standoffs and hate-filled depositions. The moment hung there, tight as wire. He clenched his fist and swung, but she moved again, barely. Just enough. His knuckles grazed her jaw without full force, enough to sting, to humiliate, but not enough to knock her down. She stood her ground. "You don't scare me," she said, eyes fierce. "You shame yourself." Cole growled. "Get her in the truck." Another agent stepped forward, hesitating. Agent Lisa Hart. Her hands trembled as she took Amara's arm, not violently, but like someone being forced to betray her conscience. "Ma'am," Lisa said under her breath. "I'm sorry." Amara turned slightly. "Then stop." But Lisa didn't. She helped Cole shove Amara toward the unmarked SUV. A woman in the crowd yelled, "We're recording!" Others chimed in. "You can't just take her. That's Amara Davis. She's a civil rights lawyer." Cole turned toward the crowd, raising his voice. "Step back. Obstruction of a federal investigation is a felony." But his voice cracked, just a bit. Enough to betray fear. Enough to know the moment was slipping from his grip. Amara stumbled as she was pushed inside the vehicle. The seats smelled of leather and sweat. Her bag, her files, lay scattered on the park pavement. The doors slammed. Inside the car, silence pressed like a second set of cuffs. Lisa avoided eye contact. Cole checked his phone. "She'll be processed," he said, more to himself than anyone. "No one's above scrutiny, especially not her." The SUV pulled away, leaving behind a stunned park. Behind them, the teen Jamal stood frozen. His hands clutched the phone still streaming live. "That's crazy," he whispered. "She didn't do anything." He looked down at the feed. Already, comments flooded in. "Wait, that's Amara Davis? She's the one who sued Delcourt. Someone needs to stop this, now." A hand touched Jamal's shoulder. An older man, salt and pepper beard, glasses, trembling lips. "Son, you recorded that?" Jamal nodded. The man pulled out his own phone. "Send it to me. I know exactly where this needs to go." Back in the SUV, Amara sat silently. The cuffs still cut deep. Her arms ached. But her spirit? Unbroken. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "You've walked clients through this. Now walk yourself." Cole glanced in the rearview mirror. "Hope you got a good lawyer." She met his eyes, steady. "I am the lawyer." And with every mile that rolled under the tires, so did the clock, counting down to the moment the world would see what had just been done. Because once truth gets out, even steel cuffs can't hold it back. Blood smeared down Amara's wrist as the SUV stopped at a red light, the handcuffs too tight, the silence deafening. She sat upright, head high despite the searing pain, the pressure of the gun still fresh in her memory. Outside, the city moved like nothing had happened. Cyclists at intersections, a woman walking her dog, steam rising from a manhole. Inside, a storm was brewing. Cole glanced back, eyes hard. "Still feel like a hero now?"